Hey everyone, hope you're all doing great. Welcome back to the Anime Fictions 2.0. Today, we're diving into part 3 of What If Naruto selected for Team 8. If you're enjoying these alternate timelines, make sure to hit that subscribe button, share it with your friends, and check out the other videos on the channel. And of course, drop your thoughts in the comments. I always love hearing your ideas. Alright, enough talk, let's get into the story. Chapter 10. As a rule, Naruto tried to avoid the Konoha General Hospital. He'd been there several times when he was younger, usually in conjunction with one of the many accidents he seemed to be involved in at the orphanage. The sharp, astringent smell of the disinfectants brought back painful memories, as did the cold eyes of the nurses and doctors. Let's not even get started on the needles. In any event, he was more than happy to let Hinata do the talking for both of them. The receptionist's voice was pleasant in tone, albeit somewhat formal, when she told Hinata Irika-sensei's room number. She still shot Naruto a rather venomous glance, but broke it off when Hinata thanked her in a clipped voice. Naruto immediately wondered if Hinata had issues with hospitals as well. Glancing over at his teammate, he saw the faint crease on her forehead. If he didn't know better, he might have thought she was angry or something. As they headed down the hallway, her features smoothed and she glanced over at him. Naruto quickly looked away, but not before she jumped a little as well. "Sorry, Hinata," he said quickly. "I guess visiting a hospital isn't much fun on your day off, is it?" "Ah no, Naruto-kun," she replied. "I would like to see Irika-sensei as well." "Ah, okay then," Naruto said, confused, as they continued down the corridor. When they found room 205, Naruto started to pull it open, but stopped when Hinata shook her head. He shrugged and knocked on the door. "Irika-sensei, are you decent?" he called out. He didn't think he'd been that loud, but Hinata cringed nonetheless. There was a low cough. "Come in, Naruto." Naruto grinned at the sound of the Chunin's voice and opened the door. Yumino Irika lay on a hospital bed, both of his lower legs wrapped in bulky casts. His ribcage was swathed in bandages as well, that extended below the line of the blanket draped across his lap. His left wrist was also in a cast, but his right arm appeared undamaged. He used this to wave the genin into the room. "I was hoping I'd see you again when you got back," he said in a cheerful voice. Naruto's stomach dropped as he took in the extent of his important person's injuries. He remembered Konohamaru shouting that Irika was dead. For an instant, he recalled the feeling of his fist punching through Kazuyo's chest and shuddered a little. Irika shook his head at his former pupil. "It's not as bad as it looks," he said quickly. "I have a few broken bones, but they're all healing rapidly. I should be out of here within a week or so." "He's right," another voice added. One that made both Naruto and Hinata stand straighter. Sitting in a chair next to the bed, partially obscured by a curtain, was their sensei, Yuhi Kurenai. She stood up quickly and nodded to her students. "I was just leaving," she added, then turned back toward Irika. "We can continue this conversation after you've been discharged." Irika nodded, smiling faintly. As the door closed behind his sensei, Naruto turned toward Irika with raised eyebrows. Then he gave the man a roguish smile. "Way to go, Irika-sensei." Irika's face turned red and he sputtered as Hinata looked away. But not before Naruto noticed a small grin on her lips. "I swear, if I wasn't confined to this bed," Irika snarled. Then he grinned. "Konoha has been far too quiet without you around, Naruto." Naruto laughed and looked down, scratching at the back of his head. He could have sworn that he heard a little chuckle from Hinata as well. "Oh." Kurenai smiled to herself as she made her way out of the hospital. Her grin grew positively evil as she saw a squad of ANBU half-carrying, half-dragging an older, bespectacled man out of a comfortable-looking office. His muffled protests carried down the corridor, causing the hospital personnel to stare. Sarutobi was proving to be as good as his word. She'd only dropped off her report a couple of hours ago, before coming to speak with Yumino Irika. Unfortunately, Irika hadn't had much time to investigate the suspicions she'd shared with him. Even before the kidnapping, he'd been tapped to help with the preparations for the upcoming Chunin exam. All the same, he managed to do a little digging while he was reorganizing the testing records. An ANBU squad had been assigned to keep an eye on Naruto after he left the orphanage. Far too many accidents were happening near the boy for it to be coincidence. The second time he'd been accidentally run over by a produce cart, He was severely injured and was in a coma for the better part of a week. Given what she knew of Naruto's recovery rate, Kurenai knew a normal little boy would likely have died from those injuries. Fear of the Hokage's wrath was likely the only reason there were no unfortunate accidents in the hospital itself. Naruto's injuries, along with the loud complaints he heard about how often the demon had come to them with new wounds, led the Sandaime to assign guardians to keep an eye on the boy. Their reports were kept in a separate file, but it was one Irika was allowed to see. He'd recorded the dates of various incidents through the years, somewhat dismayed at how often someone had tried to hurt the boy. Naruto hadn't said a thing, but it was too much to hope that he hadn't noticed the ones that were foiled ahead of time. Kurenai shook her head as she wondered, not for the last time, how her student still managed to be as human as he still was. In his place, she didn't think she would have been able to ignore so much hatred. Irika's notes did, however, reveal something interesting. There seemed to be a pattern to the incidents. They almost always happen within the first week of each month. This observation remained a statistical curiosity until Kurenai remembered that the village council always met on the last day of each month. If the bank manager could be believed, it was likely that some faction was using those meetings to plan things, or even just fanning the flames of resentment and then hoping others would take action. That would account for the timing of the attacks. Yumino Irika was an optimistic man, one who tried to assume the best about people. That helped explain why he was able to give Naruto the benefit of the doubt when few else would, something for which Kurenai was very grateful to the man. At the same time, he was also resistant to the idea that members of the village council were actively working to subvert the Hokage's will and bring harm to an innocent child. But while the timing of the attacks was not direct proof of a conspiracy, he could not come up with a more innocent explanation. In the end, he agreed that he would continue seeking proof after he was released from the hospital. Kurenai thanked him sincerely for his efforts. Any allies she could gather in this cause were precious indeed, bringing a pleased blush to his face. She was gratified to note that the man was willing to ignore his better nature where a threat to Naruto was concerned. She also didn't miss the happy smile that spread across the scarred Chunin's face at the sound of the genin's voice when her students arrived. On the other hand, his injuries and workload made him of limited use for what she needed to do. She thought about Marino Ibiki, the interrogation specialist she'd come to know in the weeks of questioning after her teammates were killed. The special had a sufficiently suspicious frame of mind. The timing of the attacks would speak volumes to him. On the other hand, she couldn't be sure of his loyalties regarding Naruto. He was utterly loyal to the Hokage, but might he be one who sought to protect the old man from his own softer nature? She didn't think it likely, but the consequences if she were wrong would be too severe. If the danger were only to herself, she might have risked it. She'd done so before when she shared her suspicions regarding Matai. Ibiki-san had given her good advice, words she had taken to heart. If you are right, he said gravely, then this goes far too deep for an easy resolution. You are a small target, girl, and one that won't be missed for very long if you start to worry about the wrong parties. Gather your information as best you can, without revealing your purpose or what you know. Then present it all at once, holding nothing back. That way, they have nothing to gain by killing you. As wise as his words may have been, she couldn't trust Naruto's safety to an unknown factor. Marino Ibiki had a well-deserved reputation for ruthlessness, especially after the botched mission where he'd acquired those horrific scars. Kurenai didn't know all the details, but she did acknowledge that Ibiki would do what he felt needed to be done, disregarding all else. If he thought Konoha's safety was best guaranteed by murdering an innocent, she didn't think he'd hesitate. It was an uncomfortable realization for Yuhi Kurenai, this acknowledgement that she could consciously place the welfare of her genin before that of her village. She supposed that the injustices inflicted by the villagers on her team made this almost inevitable, and Naruto was only the most obvious example. Hinata displayed the signs of chronic emotional abuse, most likely inflicted by her bastard father. Shino appeared to be well treated by his clan, but like most Aburames, he was rather isolated from his classmates who didn't understand or were frankly disgusted by his family's distinctive. Never mind how often the Kikai bugs had proven invaluable in missions or open warfare, the Aburame were actively encouraged to keep to themselves. Maybe that was why she'd taken Cobra-sensei's lessons on teamwork, and emphasized them even more. Perhaps if they trusted each other enough, when one of their personal situations boiled over they would be able to help each other. Kurenai knew she'd do what she could, but an effective sensei works to make their own presence unnecessary. Someday, when she was gone, perhaps these three would still be able to rely on one another. Kurenai shook her head, amused at her suddenly morbid train of thought. She would approach this situation like any other mission. She would gather her information, biding her time until it was time to act. And she would groom Naruto to become the village council's worst nightmare, a Hokage. Oh. Naruto and Hinata visited with Iruka-sensei for over 2 hours before the nurses asked them, with a polite nod toward Hinata and a scowl for him, to let Iruka rest. Of course, Naruto had told Iruka everything about their mission and the ambush. Hinata wasn't sure if this was allowed or not, but Iruka was a chunin, and they hadn't been expressly forbidden from speaking, so she remained silent while Naruto entertained his captive audience. She worried that Iruka would be angry that she led Team 8 into such a dangerous situation, but his eyes were understanding when she finally gathered the courage to stop staring at the floor. A short while later, when Naruto revealed that she knew of his prisoner, the honestly grateful look Iruka gave her spoke volumes. She couldn't remember ever receiving such a look of fervent approval before, and began to realize just how much Iruka worried about his most troublesome student. She'd give anything to have her father look at her like that. Just once. That realization soured her enjoyment of the visit, though she didn't let it show. Naruto was so happy to see Iruka in good spirits that she couldn't let herself do anything to spoil it. Still, she was quiet as they left the hospital. After a minute, Naruto asked her if she wanted to go spar, as this was their normal team training time. Hinata nodded, but they had taken no more than 3 steps before Niji appeared out of the crowd, standing in front of her. "Hinata," he said, not even acknowledging Naruto's presence. "You are to report to Higashi-sama immediately." "Hi," she agreed quickly, looking down. She didn't raise her eyes until her cousin's angry presence had departed. When she did, she was surprised to see Naruto frowning. "I have to go," she said. Naruto nodded. "Do you think you will be done in time to meet Lee and Guy?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," she said, biting her lower lip. "Father probably wants to discuss my performance on the mission." Naruto scowled fiercely, which surprised her. "If he gives you any crap," Naruto whispered, "remember what Sensei and the Hokage both said." She said her goodbyes somewhat mechanically, promising to meet early next morning, wondering what Naruto meant by that. He seemed to think her father would find fault in her conduct, which was depressing but probably accurate. But at the same time, he was telling her to recall the words of others. "Yuhi Kurenai is not one to lightly praise another's logic," the Hokage had said. The Hokage said that he agreed with Kurenai-sensei, she had done well. If father disagreed with that, did it make him wrong? Or did he just understand her better? Perhaps they did not hold her to the Hyuga standard, which her father did. But if the head of the clan disagreed with the Hokage of the village, who was right? These unsettling thoughts accompanied her all the way back to the Hyuga compound. The branch family servants directed her to the audience chamber, where she found her father sitting stiffly in his usual formal white robes. With scarcely a nod of greeting, the questions began. Off balance, Hinata began answering them as best she could, trying not to let a stammer creep into her voice. Her father seemed unusually interested in their last mission, more than he'd ever been before. She answered as truthfully as she could, trying not to stammer when he scowled or frowned thoughtfully. The Awakagure shinobi mistaking Naruto for the 4th Hokage provoked a fierce scowl, accompanied by a visible clenching of the muscles along his jaw. It wasn't until she described fighting Hanabi's kidnappers that his questions became slower and more cautious. She puzzled over this as she groped for the answers. Her father wanted something from her, but didn't want to tell her what it was. It wasn't until he asked if Naruto had displayed any special abilities that the pieces all fit together. "Not that I saw, father," she replied without missing a beat. While it was literally true, since he didn't use the red chakra until after she was knocked unconscious, Hinata was still shocked at how easily the words left her lips. She next described waking up with Naruto cleaning off her face and Hanabi standing over her, as she wondered why she had, well, not lied, but she had certainly not told the entire truth. Father suspects something happened, she realized after he had fallen silent. Why does he care, unless he wants to use this information somehow? She remembered his reaction to her first mention of her teammate's name. I think he wants to use it against Naruto somehow. Maybe he hates Naruto like how the Hokage was worried Shino, and I would if we found out the truth he wants to hurt Naruto-kun. With that the smoldering anger returned again, the frustration of failure and anger at her helplessness, but still she maintained her facade of apathy. It was this mask of eyes she'd learned to don over the years around her family. It wasn't perfect, but sometimes it made it hurt less when she spoke to her father. This time, for Naruto's sake, she held it almost perfectly. Do you have any idea how Uzumaki was able to defeat his opponents? Her father finally asked. Hinata tried to look thoughtful. He trains very hard, in addition to what Kurenai-sensei does with our team. I am working extra as well, in order to keep up, so I don't become a burden on my teammates, she answered. It was a half-truth. Naruto's improved taijutsu had definitely played a role in his victory, and she could see how his training with Gai-sensei had helped. She included that last part as an echo of her father's admonishments to not drag down her team and embarrass the clan. She felt vaguely uneasy about deceiving her father, but found to her surprise that she could do it for Naruto if she had to. The burn of shame in the pit of her stomach was drowned in her concern for her teammate. Had her father seen through her mask? Was he even now concluding that she knew more than she was telling? She knew he would find any deception on her part inexcusable. Of course, she was nervous under her father's gaze, despite her efforts to mask her emotions. That made this interview no different than scores of previous ones, where she'd hoped against hope for his approval. And so Hyuga Hayashi came to the only logical conclusion: his daughter hadn't seen anything of use. Next time you return from an extended mission, you will report directly to me, he said severely. Return to your quarters and do not leave them for the evening meal. You are dismissed. Hinata bowed and rose to her feet as gracefully as she could manage with her stomach fluttering like a sparrow in a net. She left the audience chamber on silent feet, retreating to her quarters as quickly as decorum would allow. As victories go, it wasn't much. But it was a first. Being confined to her quarters was a small price to pay, especially since she had a packed bento in her bag. Her only regret was missing the celebration for Lee. Oh. As he surveyed the ruins of the restaurant, Naruto was glad Hinata hadn't been there. Things had started off badly and had deteriorated rapidly. To start off, Hyuga Niji was there, apparently at the insistence of Guy. The white-eyed genin was coolly formal with his sensei and Tenten, ignored Lee, and looked at Naruto like something to be scraped from his sandal. Recalling the way he'd acted toward Hinata, Naruto had to actively restrain his temper. But at least he wasn't the cause of the disaster. Guy had led them in a series of toasts to Lee's success, which had led to much amusement for the other genin. Tenten just smiled at the antics of her sensei and his protege, but Niji was noticeably less subtle. Naruto saw Lee's eyes narrow, but that might have been the end of it. If it wasn't for the sake. Guy was drinking the traditional beverage for such an occasion, but he insisted that the underage genin drink non-alcoholic potables. Naruto didn't have a problem with that. He didn't want to become drunk, and he knew an alcoholic couldn't become Hokage. He settled for water, since he was still slightly dehydrated from his afternoon training. Tenten had some fruit juice, and Niji drank coffee in the Western style, a concoction that seemed to suit his bitter disposition. Lee, however, had opted for a clear but spicy fermented ginger beer. It didn't contain alcohol, but it came in ceramic bottles that resembled Guy's sake containers. Naruto wasn't sure that Lee's mimicry of his sensei was entirely healthy, but he had no idea how much of a premonition those concerns would prove to be. At some point in the toast, Guy and Lee had evidently switched bottles. After the last kanpai, Guy frowned and looked down at the bottle he poured his drink from. Lee's face, on the other hand, turned bright red and his normally wide round eyes were half-lidded. Naruto stared at his friend while Niji let out a quiet snort of amusement. Bastard! Lee slurred as he dove across the table at his teammate and rival. But what he'd done wasn't half as surprising as how he'd done it. Naruto was used to the boy's blinding speed, but what he saw now was comparable to what he'd been like after that first gate thing. Niji, the Hyuga genius, was caught flat-footed by a right hook and sent tumbling to the floor. Tenten let out a squeak and shot backwards out of her chair, right before the table edge went through the space her lap had occupied a moment earlier. Guy was only caught flat-footed for a moment before his hands shot forward to grab his student, but Lee twisted like an eel and was suddenly free, leaping from their table to an adjoining one before launching himself at Niji again. The Hyuga genin blocked 3 quick punches from the green-clad boy, and countered with a juken strike at Lee's chest that was sure to incapacitate him, except Lee bent backward almost 90 degrees at the waist, letting the strike pass harmlessly overhead. Then he calmly placed both palms on the ground behind him and, digging his fingertips into the hard wooden floor, shot up into a perfect handstand. Of course, in doing this, his feet, complete with weights, whipped upward, catching Niji in the stomach and sending him flying backward. The Hyuga bounced off another table, smearing his tunic with hoisin sauce and sending fragments of the meat dish flying amongst the diners. He finally sailed through a window, accompanied by a cloud of shattered glass. Lee! You must stop this! Guy shouted, grabbing at the genin, but Lee just disappeared and reappeared next to Tenten. Don't worry, he slurred to the kunoichi as she jumped back in surprise. Don't wanna hit you. Don't see why you like that cold fish dough. He's not as niche as his Kushin. Just as Guy's hands were reaching for Lee's shoulders, Lee fell back into a somersault, rolling between Guy's feet as smoothly as if they'd practiced that move. You wanna spar, Shinsei? Lee asked, hiccuping. Then his head turned and he saw Naruto. Lee peered at him olishly as Guy pleaded with him to calm down and wait for the alcohol to wear off. "You think Hinata is then her Kushin?" Lee asked. Naruto nodded warily, testing his footing on the sticky floor. As Lee's daily sparring partner, he was amazed he'd been spared so far. "I think she is niche. I think she Likeshi too," Lee announced with a crooked smile. He rubbed at his eyes as he let out a laugh. "That's funny because she show quiet, and you show loud. But you quiet too. Never say anything about, even dat ting in hai ju dat." He never completed his words because Naruto launched himself forward, closing Lee's mouth with his fist. Fortunately, the drunk genin seemed distracted by his own monologue, or Naruto doubted he would have even connected. The impact sent Lee tumbling into another table that had already been abandoned by fearful diners. Before the last plate had hit the ground, Lee was being held down by half a dozen clones. The taijutsu specialist arched his back and kicked, sending the clones flying upward to explode against the ceiling. But the distraction was long enough for Guy to get in close and tap two extended fingers against a spot on the back of Lee's neck. The green-clad genin stumbled forward a step, rolled his eyes up in his head, and collapsed bonelessly to the floor. Lee was still out cold when the ANBU patrol showed up. Naruto supposed he shouldn't be surprised that the restaurant owner tried to blame him for the chaos, but it still rankled. Privately, he was just glad this wasn't Moritake's, otherwise Kurenai would never forgive him. Guy, however, accepted all the blame for the situation, and promised to pay the damages, which made Naruto profoundly grateful to the man. In fact, they just nodded distractedly while the restaurant manager ranted about damaged furniture and lost business. His eyes were fixed on Lee, who dozed fitfully as he lay across a trio of chairs that Naruto had dragged together. Tenten had re-entered the trash dining room with a wobbly Niji a short while earlier. The Hyuga's eyes were unfocused, and he seemed to have trouble standing up straight, but he still shook his head when Tenten offered him a steadying hand. "A natural fighter," Guy murmured, almost too quiet to hear. "Who would have thought?" He straightened up when Tenten cleared her throat. "Send me the total once you've added it up," he said brusquely to the manager. "Tenten, please make sure Niji makes it home all right. Uzumaki-san and I will take care of Lee." Tenten nodded, ignoring Niji's disgruntled expression as she took his arm. She gave Naruto a sly wink before turning away. Naruto helped Guy pick Lee up, who only shifted restlessly and hiccuped in his sleep. As they stepped outside, watching Tenten lead Niji out into the night, Guy lowered his voice as he spoke to Naruto. "You acted decisively to keep Lee from breaking the Hokage's law," he said. Naruto shrugged. "I don't want him to get in trouble because of me," he said uncomfortably. Guy shook his head. "He won't. I had no idea he could possibly have such a strong reaction to alcohol. Probably he had an ancestor or two that were gifted drunken fist masters. That's the only thing that would explain his hair trigger reaction. We'll have to ensure he never has access to alcohol, unless it's an emergency." "I think him having alcohol would be an emergency all by itself," Naruto said doubtfully. "You didn't notice?" Guy asked, raising an eyebrow. Naruto wondered what sort of effort it must be costing the loud to speak in little more than a whisper. He just shook his head in response. Lee has never been able to get a decisive hit on Niji, for as long as they've sparred together. Tonight that was not the case. They smiled. "I think the sake has revealed some of his true potential. Now all we need to realize that potential is a lot of hard work." Naruto finished the sentence, smiling. "You're catching on," Guy said with an unsettlingly wide and shiny smile. Kurenai-sensei must be very proud. Naruto looked down, his face reddening. When he looked up again, Guy and Lee were nowhere in sight. Oh. Shino sat quietly as the Aburame elders filed into the meeting room. As a clan, the bug users were far less formal than most, but they still observed certain protocols. Normally, only adult members of the clan were able to call for a meeting or bring new business before them. As an active duty genin, Shino's status was unclear with regards to this rule. Such a situation had never before arisen. But his father was more than willing to oblige him by calling for a meeting himself. The eldest shinobi, Aburame Suba, brother to Shibi's father, looked every bit the part of the elder statesman as he took his seat at the head of the table. Aburame Shibi, may we know the reason you have called for this meeting? He asked as the others sat along the far side of the long table, facing the chairs of the petitioners. Shino's father rose to his feet in a smooth and economical motion. I have requested the attention of the council with regards to information acquired by my son. Shino rose to his feet as all eyes turned toward him. In some ways, he supposed this was considered to be intimidating. Fortunately, he was unconcerned by such peripheral matters. It has come to my attention that a grave injustice has been perpetuated, and that both myself and my clan have been a party to this undertaking, he began without preamble. It is my intention to ascertain the degree to which this treachery was committed intentionally before I undertake further action. Suba stared at his long-dead brother's grandchild for a moment. Those are serious accusations. What is the nature of this betrayal? And who was at the wrong party? In gratitude for services rendered unto the clan and Konohagakure, Shino replied, and the person involved is Uzumaki Naruto. Some of the council had obviously guessed at the purpose toward which he was in attendance, because the first objections were placed even as he finished speaking. Esteemed elder? One of his older uncles, one Aburame Bataru, asked aloud. Yes, Bataru-san? Suba replied. In light of Shino's youth and lack of knowledge regarding the relevant facts, I move that we table this discussion to avoid breaking certain village laws, Bataru continued, garnering several relieved nods from his fellows. If this lack of knowledge, Shino replied in a flat voice, is with regards to Kyubi no Kitsune, you may rest assured that I am fully aware of its existence sealed within my teammate. Who told you that? Bataru demanded, anger evident in his voice. While even Suba's eyebrows had lifted at Shino's revelation, none of the others in the room had resorted to an outburst like that. Shino idly wondered how long the man had been a member of the council. No one broke the Hokage's law, uncle, he replied coldly. I was able to deduce the existence of Naruto's prisoner through sparring and training with him. When Uzumaki-san indirectly broached the topic with me, he merely confirmed my deductions. He paused. As I told him at the time, I am neither stupid nor unobservant. Moreover, it is highly likely that, without the Kyubi's chakra to draw on, our battle with the missing Nin would have had a far less optimal outcome. Aburame Suba forestalled Bataru's objections with a raised hand. We are aware that the vessel itself is exempt from the Hokage's law, if it wishes to allow the truth to be known. But what is the nature of our clan's betrayal? Your choice of pronoun speaks volumes, esteemed elder, Shino replied, returning to his flat voice. Naruto's imprisonment of the Kyubi no Kitsune, in accord with the fourth Hokage's plan, is the only reason Konoha survived the attack. Yet he is literally shunned within our borders. The rancor of the adults is all too apparent, and he is disparaged at every opportunity by the same villagers he protects from the demon's wrath. I am ashamed to admit that I myself had acquired this low opinion of Uzumaki by listening to conversations between the adults as I matured. When it was announced that I was to be placed on a team with him, I accepted this assignment with only the greatest misgivings. Shino had begun pacing before the table as he talked, which was the only visible indication of his annoyance. His voice continued in a perfectly even tone, even as his choice of words grew sharp enough to draw blood. Instead, I discovered a shinobi who has labored under severe handicaps for most of his life. Yet, with the introduction of even minimal support from his sensei, begins to progress at a rate I find unbelievable. Except for the fact that he regularly works 16-hour days, or longer, constantly training now that someone is finally willing to give him a chance. He stopped before the center of the table, straightening his dark glasses. I find his actions to be well beyond the possibilities of a discontinuous variation in personality. He did not change like this overnight. I wish to know the reasons why I heard older clan members openly disparaging my teammate, One of the most gifted and quite honestly the hardest working genin I have ever encountered. He's always pulling pranks. Batara snarled as more than a few eyes turned toward him. Did you not see what he did to the Hokage monument? Such acting out, desirous of provoking a reaction or some acknowledgement, is not unknown behavior in someone who is being socially isolated, Shino observed. Given the fact that he has yet to engage in such behavior since leaving the academy, it seems likely that you speak about a reaction to this conspiracy of isolation, rather than one of its antecedents. There are reports of theft from merchants, breakage and vandalism, Batara countered. However well behaved he is now, he was a public menace when he was younger. Shino stared at the man. He remembered the way many of the merchants regarded his teammate, but more importantly he remembered how Naruto reacted. He looked away, avoided their hateful gazes, and otherwise tried to distract himself. My apologies, he replied, deliberately allowing a quaver to enter his voice. I was unaware of his past misbehavior. I'm sure his sensei will wish to deal with this personally. When Batara nodded indulgently, he sprung the trap. That being the case, if you will provide me with an itemized list of the offended parties, Kurenai-sensei can deduct the damages from his mission payments. Batara frowned. List? Of course, Shino replied. If you have knowledge of these crimes, then justice must be done. Since any merchant will keep close track of any thefts or breakage as business losses for tax purposes, we should have quite a list to set straight. I don't have this information, Batara snapped, the tightening skin visible around his glasses indicating that his eyes were narrowed. You don't? Shino asked innocently. Then how do you know that these incidents occurred? I heard about them at council meetings, Batara explained curtly. I see. Then as the clan representative to the council you can request the records from them, Shino concluded. I am not sure they were actually recorded, Batara said quickly. Aburame Tsuba was frowning visibly. I was given to understand that the Uzumaki boys' predations were a matter of public record, Batara-san. Is this not the case? They talked about him almost every meeting, Batara insisted, his stammering increasing and emotional equilibrium decreasing in proportion to each other. Representatives from most of the guilds would voice their complaints, but everyone knew the Hokage favored the boy, and would hear no ill words about him. So some money was set aside in a fund to reimburse those who'd suffered losses, as long as they reported them to the council. Shino stared at the man. And who investigated these claims? He asked. I don't know, Batara admitted. So, to sum this up, Shino said, beginning to pace again. If representatives from one or more of the merchants came forward with reports about Uzumaki Naruto stealing or damaging their merchandise, they would receive compensation from the village council. And you are unsure if the damage claims were ever investigated to determine their veracity. Uzumaki Naruto thereby acquired a reputation within the village council as a thief and criminal at a very young age. The various representatives attending these council meetings report this information back to their organizations, and soon everyone in Konoha knows of his reputation. Shino stopped pacing and spun on his heel right in front of Batara's section of the table. But there appears to be no proof that any of these claims are truthful, he spat, making his now least favorite uncle flinch backward slightly. He's still a damn demon, Aburame Batara snarled, completely losing control of his emotions. No, Shino corrected. He's the demon's jailer. We, of all people, should understand that what someone holds inside themselves is not the sum total of their being. I've dealt with that issue among my peers, as I am sure each of you have done at some point. Many cannot look beyond our allies. The presence of Kikai bugs hosted within our bodies makes it impossible for many to relate to us in any meaningful way. But just because I have 2 colonies of Kikai, he continued, ignoring the startled look several elders shot his father, doesn't mean I am a Kikai, just as Uzumaki Naruto containing the Kyubi no Kitsune doesn't mean he is the demon. He shook his head in what was undoubtedly a somewhat theatrical manner, but meeting with the elders had tarnished his conception of them. Batara was the worst of them, but they seemed far more emotional and far less rational than he'd expected. His father was a far clearer thinker than most of them, and he'd yet to be offered a seat at this table. Given what I have heard today, Shino concluded, I think it is clear how this deception was perpetrated. I will take my leave of you now, and will not trouble you further. He bowed and turned to leave. What are your plans? Aburame Tsuba's voice stopped him as he approached the door to the chamber. Shino stopped and turned back toward the gathered elders. I cannot, in good conscience, remain a member of a clan willing to engage in such slanderous activities. As such, I plan to visit the Hokage's offices and file papers requesting formal emancipation from the Aburame clan. I will move to an apartment within Konoha and trouble you no further. Shino had often wondered about the saying "you could hear a pin drop," considering it an exaggeration at best. But the silence that followed his words appeared to be a very close approximation to just such a condition. Aburame Suba turned toward his nephew, Shibi, raising an eyebrow. Misato and I will support our son in whatever he considers to be the most honorable path for him to take, Shino's father replied urbanely as he opened up a portfolio and shuffled some documents around. Shino didn't imagine his sire to be overly pleased at such a thing, but he found himself oddly moved at this show of support. The angry murmurs between the elders were increasing in volume, and Shino felt his colonies begin to react to the pheromones released by a considerable number of perturbed Kikai. Silence! Aburame Suba snapped, his voice cutting across the muttering like a kunai. Aburame Shino, you have more than made your point. It appears, in all likelihood, that we have been party to something we never should have been, the elder concluded, ignoring Bataru as he half rose from his chair. Rest assured that I will get to the bottom of this, he continued, and we will make amends as they are needed. He paused. I ask only that you take no precipitous action until we have concluded our investigation. Is that acceptable? Shino bowed deeply. This was a far greater concession than he had hoped for, thus it behooved him to be gracious. I thank you for your consideration, honored elder, he said in the formal manner. After he left the chamber with his father, Shino found his hands trembling for some strange reason. From a physiological perspective, he supposed it was from nervous tension, but he hadn't felt that nervous beforehand. This was highly curious, and something he noted to himself to pursue at a later date. What do you anticipate being the outcome of their deliberations? He asked his father quietly. Aburame Shibi was quiet for a moment. Some will argue that you are attempting to force them to action via threats, something which should not be encouraged. But I think Bataru will be reassigned to other duties in the near future, and someone with greater ability to detect deception will be in his place. Beyond that I can only speculate. Shino nodded. Your support at the end was appreciated, he said. Your mother would be highly displeased by such an occurrence, Shibi observed, but your commitment to correctness of action is commendable and must be supported whenever possible. They were silent the rest of the way back to their home. Oh. Naruto was happy to see Hinata join them early the next morning at Training Area 23. He was half afraid her father would have forbidden her to come once he found out. Or had he? Naruto decided to leave well enough alone and just not ask. Her manner was somewhat diffident, but she smiled slightly when he said good morning. Life was good. Lee definitely looked somewhat worse for the wear that morning. He evidently strained several muscles the previous night when he trashed the restaurant, and was in no condition to do anything very strenuous until they had a day or so to recover. So Guy asked Naruto and Hinata to spar again, and worked with each of them on their forms. To Hinata's obvious surprise, Guy-sensei appeared to have learned a lot about Juken from having Niji on his team. Naruto's respect for his abilities as a teacher went up another notch when he began working on the subtle details of Hinata's footwork, just like he'd done for Naruto. Hinata's face seemed to run the gamut of emotions, ranging from shock that an outsider could be so knowledgeable about her clan's unique taijutsu, to gratification that he was willing to spend so much time with her. Naruto began to entertain some doubts about that special Hyuga training she'd gone through, but he kept them to himself. Guy also suggested that Hinata might want to learn some basic token forms as well. Not only would it improve her ability to defend against conventional taijutsu, but it would also give her something to fall back on if her chakra reserves were exhausted. The Hyuga girl accepted this reasoning, and while she was a little awkward at first, working on forms in tandem with Naruto seemed to help her settle down. At the end of the class, Guy presented Naruto and Hinata with some specialized inserts for their wrist and ankle weights. The metallic slugs had been graven with special seals, so if chakra was pushed into them in the correct manner, their apparent density and weight increased to a large degree. I was wondering what we would do after all the weights were in, Naruto said as the light of comprehension dawned. If these things got much bigger, they would start to get in the way. Guy nodded seriously. Without these special weights, Lee would never be able to see his feet again. For some reason, Naruto found this image outrageously funny and nearly collapsed on the ground laughing. Hinata resisted the urge, but couldn't help but smile at her teammate. After a hurried breakfast, he and Hinata made a quick trip to see Tenten's father and pick up some replacement gear. He managed to lose several kunai and almost half of his shuriken on the patrol mission, but he had more than enough money to replace his losses from the mission pay alone, let alone his share of the bounties. Most of the bounty money had been deposited, he reminded himself as he tore his eyes away from the stacks of explosive tags. He really needed to learn a that made explosions, but he somehow doubted Kurenai-sensei would be teaching him that any time soon. Even with their detour, they still made it to their designated meeting place with plenty of time to spare. Shino was there already, greeting them with a raised hand. Naruto couldn't be sure, but his teammates seemed to be more relaxed? At least more than he'd been the previous day. Naruto was curious, but knew better than to ask. When Kurenai arrived, she made a point of checking their gear to make sure they'd followed instructions, and then told stories of several shinobi teams who'd flubbed important missions, in one case losing a team member, because they either didn't bring the appropriate gear, or had a crucial item break at a bad time. By the time she was done, Naruto was carefully checking over the kunai he hadn't replaced. It wasn't until they were halfway to the Hokage's tower to get a mission that Naruto noticed the faint smile on her face. He bit his tongue, but wondered when he'd have the opportunity for another Lehenge-style prank for his sensei. Going back to regular D-rank missions was almost a letdown, in a way. That didn't stop them from working to make sure it was completed as quickly and efficiently as possible. Shino was the original driving force behind that, but Naruto and Hinata soon took it on as a challenge as well. Competing to see how quickly they could locate the Fire Lord's wife's cat gave them something to work toward, rather than simply becoming bored with the routine mission. After the quickest cat capture they'd managed so far, courtesy of Shino's Kikai bug that was still in residence under the cat's collar, their second mission was a little unusual. They were tasked with demolishing an abandoned building on the outskirts of the village, outside the defensive wall. The decrepit structure might once have been intended as a livery stable, but now it was little more than an eyesore. Naruto was hoping Kurenai-sensei would take the opportunity to teach them fire. But when he broached the topic, she reminded them that fires could burn out of control far too easily. And so they were left with physically breaking down the structure to minimize the potential for collateral damage. As usual, each member of Team 8 found different ways to best use their abilities. Shino's bugs immediately began eating away at the building's remaining support members, turning the thick beams into sawdust. Naruto got to practice some of the golden power moves that he'd learned from Gai-sensei, while Hinata used her Byakugan to help locate load-bearing stress points within the structure that should be targeted first. It was a dirty, nasty job, and even slightly dangerous when it came time to bring down the roof. But for all that, it was over soon enough. When the building was flattened, Kurenai stared at her filthy subordinates. Each of them was smeared with sawdust, grime, and cobwebs from the old stable. "I think that's enough for today," she said firmly. "We can pick up the pay tomorrow when we report in." Naruto frowned up at the sun. "Isn't it a little early to quit now?" Kurenai just rolled her eyes. "Ano," Hinata offered quietly, "I'm not sure we are really presentable anymore. Not to see the Hokage anyway." Naruto looked down at his jacket and frowned. He tried to brush off the worst of the mess, but only managed to grind most of it deeper into the fabric. Kurenai left, saying she needed to check on something, as the three genin re-entered the village and trudged up the street. "You know," Naruto said after a while, "that was kind of fun." Shino nodded a fraction of an inch. Overly destructive behavior is normally frowned upon. Therefore, being placed in a situation where it is not only allowed, but encouraged, would be a pleasant contrast. Right," Naruto said dubiously. He leaned back, catching Hinata's eyes behind Shino's back, and making her smile as he rolled his eyes. "A precise manner of speaking is not a liability," Shino reminded them. His head hadn't turned at all, nor had he given any other sign of noticing their byplay. "Though I suppose it might be considered out of character for some," he concluded. "Are you saying I'm stupid?" Naruto asked with mock belligerence. "No," Shino answered. "Merely imprecise." "Oh," Naruto replied, nodding slowly. "That's all right then." He held his face in an innocently stupid expression long enough for Shino to glance toward him and sigh. The blonde genin laughed out loud. Hinata didn't join in, but she did smile fondly at her teammates. As inevitable as gravity, When teammates finished their missions early, they tended to end up at Ichiraku's. The place was fairly quiet before the dinner rush began, and the old man who ran the place seemed to have developed a liking for Naruto and his teammates. It also didn't hurt that Naruto's work ethic and metabolism left him hungry, in varying degrees, typically from quite to very, most of the day. He was on his third bowl, the others barely into their first, when he looked up from his food and swallowed hard. Limping down the street were the members of Team 7, looking rather the worse for wear. All of them were covered with half-healed scratches and cuts, their uniforms ragged and frayed in places. Even the normally impeccably groomed Yukika looked like he'd been thoroughly mauled at some point in the recent past. Naruto swallowed and elbowed his teammates. Hinata gasped quietly when she saw them. Naruto called out, "What happened to you guys?" Any rancor he might have retained toward his former classmates was overridden by his curiosity. Anything that could do that to Sasuke. Kiba's head snapped around, nearly dislodging Akamaru from his perch. He smirked, and began walking slowly toward Ichiraku's. Sasuke frowned, but Sakura appeared to persuade him to follow their boisterous teammate. "We just came back from an A-ranked mission," the dog user announced in a loud voice. Old man Tucci looked up from his broth pot and fixed the Inuzuka with a gimlet eye, making the boy duck his head. "I understand that your team was given a C-ranked mission," Shino observed. "We were," Sakura said as she joined them. When the old man's glare shifted to her, she quickly sat down and ordered a bowl of vegetable-flavored ramen. Kiba's nostril dilated and his stomach growled, a high-pitched noise that made Akamaru peer down at his master. He quickly ordered a bowl of beef ramen, as did Sasuke. The old man filled their orders without a word, evidently having a long memory. "Anyway," Kiba continued, "turns out the old drunk who hired us was lying about the mission. He had a missing nin after him, but he couldn't afford to pay for an A or B-ranked mission, so he pretended he was just afraid of bandits." "You should be more respectful of Tazuna-san," Sakura scolded her teammate. "If he told the truth, he'd still be alive today," Sasuke said coldly. Kiba frowned. "Yeah, well, it was a mess. There were 4 of them, only one of them was just a kid our age. But the older one was this guy called Zabuza of the Mist. Kakashi says that facing someone like that automatically made it an A-ranked mission." "Ano, is that what happened to you?" Hinata asked in a sympathetic voice. Sakura nodded and Kiba continued his tale. "They were pretty tricky. We fought 2 on the way down, but they were punks. Me and Sasuke held them off and Kakashi nailed them. Some losers are called the Demon Brothers. But that eyebrowless freak was tough. He fought Kakashi-sensei to a standstill until he got Sharinganed. Then that kid showed up and acted like he'd killed him." He shrugged. "After he recovered, they came back and attacked Tazuna at the bridge." Kiba opened up his jacket and rapped his knuckles against the thick leather armor underneath. "If I hadn't been wearing this, Haku's needles would have cut me to pieces." Sakura nodded. "He moved so fast that Sasuke-kun was the only one who could catch him." Sasuke grunted. Kiba shrugged. "We fought him while Kakashi-sensei had another rematch with Zabuza. This time, Zabuza didn't get away. Kakashi-sensei did this assassination technique on him." He shuddered. "He didn't have a chance after Kakashi-sensei's summoned dogs pinned him down. Haku surrendered after that. He was only fighting for Zabuza, and if Akamaru hadn't latched onto his leg, I think he was going to try and throw himself between Kakashi and Zabuza to save his master." Akamaru let out a yip when his name was mentioned, but Kiba's frown grew darker. "He said he was just a tool," Sasuke said in a quiet voice. "When was this?" Sakura asked in confusion. "When I was resting after the tree-climbing exercise," Sasuke answered. "He approached me in civilian garb, pretending to be a villager. He mentioned having a precious person, and how he would do anything for them." The Uchiha frowned. "I didn't realize it was the same person until after Kiba broke his mask." Kiba shook his head. "That makes more sense now. After Zabuza died, the gangster who hired him showed up. One of his men shot Tazuna with an arrow and they were about to unload on us when Gato spit on Zabuza's body." The larger boy let out a sigh. Haku was standing in place, staring at Zabuza's body. He didn't say a word when Gato's men seized him. But the second Gato degraded Zabuza, it was like he just disappeared. Suddenly men were dying left and right, then Zabuza's sword disappeared and the next thing we know Gato was spitted on it like a fish. Kiba shook his head. And then Haku appeared in front of Kakashi-sensei, Sakura said. He said that Zabuza had once forbidden him to take his own life, so he asked Kakashi-sensei to kill him. Naruto's eyes had grown wide at this tale. Did he? He asked. Sakura shook her head. No, he hit Haku on the neck and knocked him out. We just finished carrying him back, Kiba said. Kakashi-sensei said capturing someone like that would probably earn us a bonus as well. But we failed in our primary mission, Sasuke added darkly. At least, Sakura added quickly, glancing at her teammate, with Gata dead, Tsunami and the others have enough money to hire a construction crew to complete the bridge. So Tazuna-san's dream of finishing the bridge will be fulfilled, right? Sasuke nodded silently, then rose from his stool, leaving some coins on the counter. He stalked off without looking back. Man, he makes me want to smack him so hard, Kiba muttered. Don't, Sakura said sharply. Just don't. Please. She turned back toward Team 8. Sasuke-kun is just upset that his first big mission wasn't a total success. Kakashi-sensei said we did very well, but Sasuke-kun expects a lot from himself. Naruto nodded faintly. So, Sakura added brightly, obviously trying to change the subject. Did anything interesting happen in Konoha while we were gone? Naruto opened his mouth, but then shut it. What was the use? Nothing really. Just a lot of missions. Sakura nodded faintly, but her eyes appeared troubled. Naruto ate quietly until Sakura and Kiba finished. As soon as they were gone, Hinata spoke up. Ano, Naruto-kun, why didn't you tell them about our mission? Naruto shrugged. Why didn't you? That question left Hinata speechless for a moment, but Shino stepped in. She probably wondered why you were hesitating, and assumed you had a valid reason for doing so. Now, we would like to hear it. Naruto snorted, but then his face went serious. I don't know, it just didn't feel right. You know, to act like we were bragging when they were all so down about their mission. These are the same people who picked a fight with you the last time you saw them, Shino pointed out. Yeah, Naruto conceded, but it's different now, isn't it? People died, you know. On both missions. He broke off for a second when he realized that Hinata was staring at him. I don't know, it just didn't feel right, he concluded lamely. There was no further conversation as they finished their meal. Oh. Kurenai frowned as she approached the Hokage's tower, thinking about the scrolls Shino had slipped her between missions earlier that day. She was slightly surprised by the degree to which the silent boy had taken the initiative in dealing with his clan. The anger she noted during their return to Konoha must have run deeper than she'd expected. While it was gratifying that at least one clan was revising their opinion of Naruto, his information regarding how those lies had been spread was far more illuminating. Someone with considerable influence on the village council was abusing their power in an attempt to subvert the will of both the third and the fourth Hokages. She sat through the meeting of instructors, preoccupied by Shino's revelation, until she realized the purpose of the gathering. And while it is allowed for newly graduated genin to compete in the Chunin exam, it is up to the individual instructors to determine whether they feel their students are ready or not, the Sandaime continued. Given the dangers, I suggest you give it a lot of thought. Kurenai's mind raced as the meeting ended. Kakashi had returned from his mission, looking somewhat worse for wear. He glanced at her, his single exposed eye crinkling in a manner that suggested he was smiling under that ridiculous mask. I don't know about you, he said in a conversational tone, but I'm going to give my team the option if they want to. Kurenai merely raised an eyebrow. You think they are ready? She challenged me. Kakashi's manner went deadly serious with a speed that still caught her by surprise. They faced death on their last mission, and had to deal with some very dangerous missing nuns. Kurenai nodded. As did mine, she added with an enigmatic smile. Of course, at that point they had little choice but to retire to Moritex for a mutual game of question and answer. Kakashi's description of their fake mission was rather grueling, making Kurenai wince at certain points, but the infamous copycat ninja lost his fabled cool when she described the end of the melee with the kidnappers. You mean Naruto, Uzumaki Naruto, the loudest ninja in the village? Kakashi demanded. The only person I ever saw who dressed worse than Guy. He took out 2 missing nins himself? Kurenai nodded, fighting to keep a smug grin off of her face. The battle had been a close thing, but the effort invested in her special project had more than paid off. Both of them were listed in the bingo book as high B/low A in classification, so they were no pushovers. Kakashi leaned back in his chair, his eyes staring into the distance. "It'll be interesting to see how your students match up against mine in the Chunin exams," he finally said. Kurenai nodded, only then realizing that her mind was already made up. For at least 2 of her charges, becoming a Chunin might offer them some security from the forces acting against them. And taking the exam when it was held in Konoha also cuts down the potential dangers. And while she would not be there for the actual tests, for the most part they would have each other to rely on. She would at least offer them the option, but she knew there was little doubt that Team 8 would go for it like they did most things. Together. Chapter 11. "You want us to test for Chunin?" Naruto asked, amazed. He couldn't believe his sensei, who arranged extra training so he could become a respectable genin, actually thought he was now ready to become a Chunin. He looked around their usual training area, wondering if this was a prank of some sort. "I am willing to authorize you 3 to participate in the Chunin exam," Kurenai clarified. Naruto frowned. That was what he just said, wasn't it? "I believe Kurenai-sensei is specifying that the choice is ours," Shino explained. "Ayano," Hinata said in a hesitant voice, the unexpected news having evidently made her fall back on older, more tentative mannerisms. "Isn't it unusual for a team to take the exam during their first year?" Kurenai nodded. "It is, but I think it would be a valuable training experience for all of you. Also, with the exam being held in Konoha, it should be fairly safe, while still giving you 3 a chance to see what it is like. That will increase your chances for success at a later date." Naruto frowned a little. "You make it sound like we're guaranteed to fail," he objected. Kurenai shook her head. "Not quite, but the odds are very low. Keep in mind how rare it is that rookie genin teams are allowed to participate at all. At the same time, teams of any age taking the exam for the second time have a much higher rate of success." "You say it's rare for rookie teams to be allowed," Shino observed. "Are any of our former classmates going to participate?" Kurenai nodded. "Asuma and Kakashi are giving their teams the option as well." "That means Lee and his team will be there as well," Naruto added. There was no way Gai-sensei would let his eternal rival's team trump him. "It would be prudent that our first exposure to the exam occur in the company of allies," Shino observed. Naruto grunted. "I agree, except that part about us being guaranteed to fail," he said with a scowl. Kurenai took a deep breath. "That is merely a matter of statistical fact, Naruto. However, I do expect you 3 to make a good showing. There is no reason you cannot outperform your classmates, and in fact I expect you to do so. If, after all your hard work, you are shown up by Asuma's genin, I will never hear the end of it, and therefore neither will you. Do I make myself clear?" Her voice had gone a little frosty at the end, so Naruto merely nodded and refrained from saying anything else. The group sparring exercises they did together before their mission were particularly grueling, but no one complained. "Oh." Kurenai allowed herself a small smile as her team courted the affluent neighborhood. Shino's bugs had tracked the cat to this time. It had been too long since she'd been around adolescent males, she'd forgotten how competitive they could be. Their determination to pass the Chunin exam on their first attempt, as rookies, no less, was as laudable as it was impractical. Still, Naruto tended to prove people wrong, especially those who doubted him. Kurenai wondered what kinds of odds Asuma would give her. She shook her head. Such conduct was unbecoming to a Konoha jonin. At least, betting for money would be. Perhaps a wager of forfeits could be negotiated. Forcing Asuma to give up cigarettes or Kakashi to forego his little orange books for a month could prove to be highly entertaining. Of course, there was also the matter of her forfeits. She was fairly certain that playing to their male egos could let her avoid anything too onerous. At the same time, she was guiltily glad that Irika was still convalescing from his injuries. If he'd been there when the 3 of them volunteered their rookie teams, the man was sure to object. Still, she would make a point to break the news to him personally, and explain why she was anxious for her students to make Chunin as quickly as possible. Kurenai shook her head to clear it of such extraneous thoughts as Hinata led her teammates back, carrying the pampered and escape-prone house cat in her arms. Before their meeting, Shino had intercepted his teacher on the way to the team's usual meeting place. He had had a proposal, one she was rather surprised to hear. But it was a good idea, one long in coming. After we returned the cat, Kurenai began as they walked up to Hinata. We will break for the day. Naruto, Hinata, I know you've been working hard pretty much every evening since we returned, but I'd prefer that you refrain from unsupervised training until the exam starts. Unsurprisingly, Naruto scowled at this. Hinata's reaction, however, was just as visibly dismayed, at least by her standards. Kurenai secretly congratulated herself for nudging those two toward each other, but held up her hand to get their attention. First of all, I don't want you to risk injuring or exhausting yourself when the exam is less than a week away. Secondly, there are many visitors entering Konoha for the exams. Training by yourselves presents a significant risk. I'm not saying you two are incapable of defending yourselves. I'm more worried about a potential competitor spying on you to learn your techniques and tactics. It's unavoidable that you will reveal much during the exams. That is one of the purposes behind having them after all. But I'd rather you didn't give away any more than you have to. Naruto looked thoughtful during this explanation, and finally nodded. Hinata acquiesced as well, though she looked somewhat crestfallen. If that is the case, Shino said, interjecting into the silence that followed, I would like to extend an invitation to all of you for dinner with my family. Naruto actually jumped a little. Kurenai didn't think he'd actually forgotten his silent teammate was there, but it was rarely enough that he interrupted anyone that it was just as surprising. She also suspected that, deep down, Shino enjoyed tweeting his teammate like that. But what Naruto did next was even more distracting. As his teammate's words registered, Naruto's eyes grew very wide. Hey, are you serious? He asked in a shocked voice. The naked emotion on the boy's face made Kurenai feel slightly sick. It was a bald reminder of how he'd been treated for so long, a deliberate isolation that made her ill when she allowed her thoughts to dwell upon it. It was a serious request, Shino replied smoothly. My parents have expressed a desire to meet with my teammates, and this is a logical social mechanism for facilitating such a gathering. I would be honored to meet your parents, Shino-kun, Hinata replied gravely, making a short bow. Naruto blinked and then nodded. Yeah, Shino, that would be cool. Unfortunately, Kurenai said, I have to attend a meeting the Hokage has called for all the tonight. While there was a meeting scheduled to go over security arrangements for the upcoming Chunin exam, she could probably beg off if she wanted. But if she attended this gathering, her presence would undoubtedly influence it in many ways. Hinata and Naruto were her subordinates, and would no doubt defer to her when they met with the Aburames, just as they let her do the talking with the Hokage or even with that pig, Dereketsu. That was only proper, and in accord with the respect a genin should show for their Jonin sensei. However, it would also prevent the Aburames from meeting the real Hinata and Naruto. The Hyuga girl was repressed enough under normal circumstances, and Naruto had his undeserved reputation working against him. But they were both good kids, and Kurenai felt that people intelligent enough to raise Shino would no doubt see that for themselves and do so all the better if they were acting normally. Shino nodded gravely. Given the timing of the exam, this may be the last free night we have for a while, so with your permission we will go ahead with it. Kurenai waved her hand dismissively. Feel free. Your free time is your own. That goes for all of you, she added. Oh. Hinata was surprised and a little anxious about the unexpected invitation. Of course, she'd attended innumerable clan functions as a member of the Hyuga main family, but what her teammate described sounded a lot more informal than that. She had some formal kimonos she could wear, but she thought those might be too dressy. As Kurenai left for her meeting and Shino went ahead to bring word of their acceptance to his parents, Hinata's eyes flickered over toward Naruto. It was then that several pieces slid into place for her. No, she wouldn't wear a kimono. She knew from their camping trip that Naruto didn't have many clothes aside from his uniforms and a few t-shirts and pairs of shorts. Certainly nothing dressy. And he didn't have time to purchase something before the dinner. She would sooner take poison than embarrass her friend by dressing up and making him appear shabby by comparison. She was also heartened to know that Shino had been as good as his word. This invitation was proof that he was making headway with his clan regarding Naruto-kun. Given the reaction she'd seen on the street, she doubted anyone would willingly invite Uzumaki Naruto into their home without strong persuasion. She was jolted out of her reverie when the subject of her thoughts hesitantly tugged on her sleeve. Hinata, Naruto asked, hesitantly. Why yes, Naruto? she answered, damning herself for the quaver that still showed up at times. She was much more comfortable talking to him than she ever thought she would be, but sometimes he would catch her off balance, and her old habits would reassert themselves. Well, you see, he began, but let his voice trail off. What am I supposed to do? He finally asked, his frustration clearly overriding his nervousness. Do? Hinata asked, confused. About this dinner thing, he added. Am I supposed to bring something? How do I dress? What am I supposed to say? Hinata blinked and quickly bit her lip. Of course, Uzumaki Naruto had never been invited for dinner at someone's house before. He had no idea what to do, and it clearly distressed him. Hinata surmised that Naruto realized what a break from custom Shino's invitation represented and didn't want to waste it. Without thinking, she let her free hand rest on his wrist in a comforting gesture. I understand, Naruto-kun. I think this is mostly going to be an informal affair. Shino just invited us today, so probably no special preparation is expected. Our uniforms are still clean, and will be appropriate if they remain so. Her wardrobe's suspicions were confirmed when Naruto let out a relieved sigh. His eyes flickered down to her hand on his, and Hinata quickly withdrew hers with a rosy blush. But he didn't tease her about it. Thanks, Hinata-chan, he said sincerely. I guess you know more about this kind of stuff, huh? She nodded. I had a lot of lessons on etiquette and protocols from father, as well as the kunoichi lectures. Naruto's eyes darkened when she mentioned her father, but she had no idea how to ask him about that without seeming to pry. Well, I'll just watch you a lot then, he said with an impudent grin. The idea of Naruto-kun watching her, taking cues from her actions, was enough to set the blood flooding her cheeks again. Oh. Naruto shifted his weight nervously from one foot to the other as Hinata pressed a lacquered tile set into the doorframe. Faint chimes could be heard through the door. Shino's parents lived with the other Aburames in a neighborhood informally known as the Hive to the rest of Konoha. Given their hobbies, it seemed that other people were reluctant to live in close proximity, Shino had observed as he gave them directions. But that made it easier for them to buy up all the adjoining real estate. Naruto had thought about that as his teammate departed to let his parents know how many were coming for dinner. He had personal experience with how intolerant some people could be. It made him feel just a little better that it wasn't only him that suffered for it. He snuck a glance at his teammate as she clasped her hands in front of her stomach in a nervous gesture. Being in a prestigious family didn't guarantee you'd be treated well either. He suppressed the surge of resentment that always accompanied such thoughts these days. This wasn't the time for it. The door opened and what seemed to be a larger version of Shino stood in the doorway. As Naruto hoped, Hinata took the lead. We are honored to be invited to your home, Aburame-sama, she said, deliberately using the more deferential, polite form as they both bowed deeply. Shino's father politely inclined his head. You may call me Shibi, he said gravely. That is an unusual method of address, coming from a Hyuga, he observed as he moved aside to allow them entry. Hinata's cheeks colored, and Naruto didn't have to be reminded how the Hyugas were considered first among Konoha's ninja clans. Her father's arrogance during their last mission had made an indelible impression on his mind. And it made Hinata's humility and politeness all the more noteworthy, even if such attention flustered her. Well, you're still Shino's dad, Naruto said with a shrug, as if that explained everything. Like his son, Shibi wore dark glasses, even inside his own home, so his eyes were unreadable as they gazed at Naruto for a moment. He nodded slightly, as if in acknowledgement, and then led them toward a sitting room where he informed them that his wife and son were waiting. At this point, Naruto was expecting Shino's mother to be much like her husband and son, except perhaps with a slightly more feminine jacket. He could not have been more wrong. The lady of the house wore an emerald green tunic over long pants. The former had an exotic cut to it, and the color matched her eyes perfectly. The fact that her eyes were visible was a shock of its own, but her behavior was even more so. You must be Naruto and Hinata, she said, rising from her seat with a large smile. Welcome to our home. They began to bow, Naruto watching Hinata from the corner of his eye to make sure he went far enough, but she waved them off. No need for that, this isn't a meeting of the clan elders, otherwise Shino would be bullying people and making them feel stupid. We just want to get to know our son's friends. I'm Misato, and I see you've met Shibi-kun already. Both the Aburame males looked chagrined at different points in her speech. Naruto looked up and locked eyes with the cheerful woman. She didn't hesitate, or refuse to meet his eyes. Naruto saw curiosity and good-natured teasing in abundance, but no fear. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked. He hadn't intended to voice the question out loud, and the sound of his own voice startled him just a bit. "Not a bit," she said. "I met my husband when he was the official envoy to Hidden Mist." She smiled over at her husband. "He was so serious and solemn that I never stood a chance. His assignment ended right after Shino was born and all three of us returned to Konoha." Naruto looked over at Shino with raised eyebrows. He never knew Shino hadn't been born in Konoha. Not that it really made a difference, but it underlined how little he really knew about his friend. "Anyway," Misato concluded, "that's why I'm a little livelier than these two." She cracked a teasing grin as Shino and Shibi both raised visible eyebrows above their glasses. "I had such hopes for Shino, too. He was such a pretty baby, always laughing and so ticklish." Her eyes took on a wicked glint as she exercised her parental prerogative to embarrass her child in front of his peers. "Ayano," Hinata interjected. "As Shino is very lively," she continued, defending her friend. "He's just quiet." "Yeah," Naruto added quickly. "He makes up for me being so loud." Shino let out an audible sigh from behind his jacket collar. "Shino," Misato said in a tragic voice, her eyes dancing with mischief. "This is the first time you've brought friends home. I have a lot of time to make up for it." "Perhaps," Shibi countered, "we can continue this discussion over dinner, as that was the reason our guests were invited." "Very well," Misato agreed and started leading them toward an archway. "The roasted termites are probably about done, but they won't stay crispy for long." Naruto paused for a moment as his brain struggled with some disconcerting mental images. He swallowed heavily and silently renewed his vow to do nothing that would spoil the evening. "She has an unusual sense of humor," Shino muttered quietly as he fell into step next to him. "I heard that," Misato said as she entered the dining room. "And good hearing, too," Naruto commented. "Oh." Fortunately for Hinata, the dinner was fairly normal fare for Konoha, although prepared with obvious precision. She'd had to eat some unusual things at formal dinners, but she wasn't sure she could eat roasted bugs without some time to prepare herself. Shino's mother was not what she'd expected, especially after meeting his father on the border patrol mission. But while Misato had definitely caught them off balance, she was still quite nice, in addition to being a good cook. Her sense of humor reminded Hinata of Naruto at his pranking best, teasing and playful, but never deliberately cruel. The conversation over the dinner table was somewhat more serious, as Shino's parents set out to learning more about their son's comrades. However, Misato had obvious difficulty keeping a straight face once Naruto confirmed that the rumors about Madogai were fairly accurate. Naruto's imitation of his taijutsu tutor's power of youth rant was uncannily accurate. It also left Misato looking like she was about to injure herself, or at least collapse due to lack of air. They seemed a bit surprised at the training regimen that she and Naruto adhered to. Objectively, she knew that many kunoichi her age desired more free time to be with friends and family or just to have fun. But her shyness meant she had few friends, even if father would have allowed her to make friends outside the clan. Shameful as it was to admit, the less time she spent around her family, the better she seemed to feel. Training with Naruto and going on missions with her team was, in fact, about the most enjoyable thing she could think of to do. Hinata was seized with a vague sense of wrongness when she thought about how different her life seemed to be, compared to other genin. But dwelling on that didn't seem to be a good idea. Getting stronger, helping Naruto and Shino become stronger, those were good things. Productive things. Things she could actually make a difference in. When they finished their recital of a day in the life of Team 8, Shino's parents exchanged a look. "Your assessment of the relative deficits was accurate," Aburame's Shibi said, turning toward Shino. "While I do not, at this time, believe you are a liability, that may change soon. You will now spend the mornings working with your mother on her weapons specialty." Hinata wasn't sure what that referred to, but given the speed at which Shino turned toward Aburame Misato, it seemed to be important. The woman shrugged and gave a lazy grin that was almost a smirk. "I promised my teacher I wouldn't pass anything along to someone not from the village, but technically you were born there." Shino nodded slowly. "I see." He turned back toward his father. "And the breeding project?" "It will continue," Shibi confirmed. "But as your Uncle Batara's replacement, I can assign one of the other clan members to take charge of the maintenance. It is, after all, a project that will benefit the clan as a whole if it is successful. Project? Naruto asked, his curiosity finally getting the better of him. Shino took a deep breath, but paused and looked at his friend. He shook his head briefly. Faster bugs, was all he said. Really? Naruto asked. Cool. So are you looking forward to the Chunin exam? Misato asked, obviously steering the conversation onto safer ground. Hinata couldn't help a small smile as Naruto talked about the exam, his natural enthusiasm eroding any lingering awkwardness. Though she did wish he hadn't included her when he stated that Team 8 would kick everyone's butt and all make Chunin. Do you remember our sensei stating the odds of rookie genin passing the test? Shino asked in a slightly acid tone. Never tell me the odds, Naruto said firmly. Besides, he added, we have Hinata-chan on our side. Right, Hinata-chan? Hyuga Hinata promptly wished she knew a doton she could use to sink through the floor. Her face grew redder as Naruto unabashedly boasted of her finishing off the shinobi that broke into the Hokage's tower, and how she pierced the kidnappers and rescued her sister with spectacular acrobatics. Oddly enough, when Misato asked Naruto what he'd done in those fights, he just shrugged and said, I hit them a few times. He paused. Well, more than a few times if you count the Kage Bunshin. While Misato seemed to lead the questioning, Shino's father just listened quietly for the most part. But Shibi's attention still felt like a physical weight when he was focused upon you. Hinata was slightly uncomfortable with how that reminded her of her father in some respects, but his gaze seemed to lack the anger that always simmered in her father's eyes. Of course, dealing with years of failures on her part had to have a lot to do with that, she realized. The time passed with surprising speed, and before they knew it, dinner was over and they were lingering over one last cup of tea with the Aburames. Thank you for inviting us into your home, Hinata said in a formal tone as the evening seemed to be winding down. Naruto nodded his agreement, and Hinata had to suppress a blush. It was odd to finally encounter a situation where Naruto had to rely on her so heavily. It felt good. For once, she had an opportunity to guide him after all the times he'd helped her, or inspired her. Even beyond that, she found that without the nervousness inspired by her father's assessing gaze, she'd actually enjoyed taking a meal with strangers and getting to know them. It was also refreshing to go an entire meal without slipping up, forgetting what to say, or otherwise embarrassing herself. Perhaps it was because Naruto needed her knowledge to guide them both, but she was pretty sure it was something else. The pleasure was all ours, Misato said with an impish grin. Shino's mother was so unlike her husband or son, but Hinata intuited that they actually enjoyed the differences between them. Having been raised under the strict protocols for proper behavior, both in public and in private, it was a startling concept for Hinata to digest. Startling, but strangely attractive nonetheless. Agreed, Aburames should be added. You both are welcome in our house at any time. Hinata, not trusting her voice at the moment, merely bowed deeply. Out of the corner of her eye, she was relieved to see Naruto aping her, despite the confused look on his face. The declaration by Shino's father was the highest compliment that could be paid to a guest, and amounted to an offer of alliance, and even temporary sanctuary, if needed. That is not necessary, Shibi said, though his tone was not sharp. Shino's assessment of your nature and characters logically requires this. Even beyond that, if his teammates were not capable, brave, and loyal, our son might not have survived his first C-ranked mission. Shino did his part too, Naruto said as he straightened up, scowling. Yes, he did, Shibi agreed. But if you two had not done yours as well, the mission could have ended in failure or even death. Your success is integral to his success. That is the nature of a team. Even beyond that, there is the matter of the prisoner that you protect us from. Hinata bit her lip as Naruto froze in place at the mention of the Kyuubi. Everyone here is aware of your burden, Uzumaki Naruto, so I am not breaking the Hokage's law, Shino's father continued. That said, we are guilty of relying on hearsay as to your previous actions and character. That situation has since been corrected, he added, giving Shino a sideways glance, but I would still like to extend an apology, on behalf of my family and my clan. Hinata could almost feel the jumble of emotions coming from Naruto as his face went pale, then pink. He ducked his head forward, his eyes having grown suspiciously shiny. Apologies are not necessary, he said quickly in a thick voice. As you say, Uzumaki-san, Shibi replied. But you will not be slandered without cause within my hearing. Hinata looked up from Naruto, and ended up locking eyes with Misato. The woman's bright green eyes seemed to bore into hers for a moment. Then she gave the pale-eyed girl a slow, deliberate wink, for what, Hinata wasn't sure. Oh. Naruto was still a bit numb as they said their goodbyes and left the Aburame neighborhood. Objectively, he'd hoped to win over the people of Konoha when he became Hokage, hoped they would acknowledge him and the burden he'd carried for them since the day of his birth. But to have it actually happen was not something he was prepared for. The Aburame were not the largest or most prestigious of Konoha's shinobi clans. But to have even one family break ranks from the rest and declare him welcome into their home at any time, he didn't need Hinata's whispered explanation as they walked along the moonlit streets of Konoha to know how significant that was. And he was far too excited to be calmly walking down the street. With a grin, he grabbed Hinata's hand and leaped onto the nearest roof. His sparring partner's reflexes were as fast as his, and she managed to time her leap to meet his own. With the moon, it was as bright as noon to their dark-adjusted eyes. With a playful grin, Naruto let go of Hinata's hand and tapped her shoulder with his fingertips. "You're it," he said as he sprang away. In an instant, Hinata was pursuing him across the rooftops. Fortunately, they'd both increased their weights recently, so they were fairly evenly matched as they darted from roof to roof. Given their normal training regimen, they were used to far more physical activity than they'd had that day. Aside from that, Naruto had never had the chance to play games like this before, and playing tag with your own shadow clones was just pathetic. At one point he landed near an odd-shaped roof cornice that shimmered and melted away to reveal a figure wearing an ANBU mask. "Pursuit training," Naruto said quickly as he leapt away. "Excuse me, ANBU-san." Naruto smiled as he heard Hinata's voice echo from the roof he just vacated. Their game meandered across the rooftops of Konoha until they cut across a block of buildings usually reserved for visiting officials. As he landed, Naruto was engulfed in a miasma of killing intent more intense than he'd ever felt. Instead of leaping away, he dropped into a crouch and spun, seeking the source of the murderous rage. There, standing on the roof beam, was a smallish red-headed shinobi with a large gourd strapped to his back. Teal-colored eyes, ringed with dark circles, glared at him with frightening intensity. Above one eye was a kanji symbol obscured by hair and shadows. The sash securing the gourd in place held a hidden sand symbol that glinted in the moonlight. Fighting Kanzuya to the death wasn't nearly as frightening as having this strange kid just look at him. Naruto clenched his fists to keep his hands from shaking. His feet felt rooted in place. If this strange kid attacked, would he even be able to dodge? Just then, Hinata landed next to him and let out a quiet gasp. Without thinking, Naruto found himself moving, standing in front of his frozen teammate, facing the terrifying shinobi with a kunai in each hand. He could feel the red chakra pulsing in his coils now, raging like a living thing, wanting out. His eyes, suddenly seeing with incredible clarity, picked out the small wisps of sand circling around the boy's feet. His nose picked up the smell of old blood. Was it coming from the sand or from the gourd? And how was he smelling it from here? It wasn't until Naruto noticed the faint red glare reflecting back from the dull tiles around him that the boy spoke. "You're like me," he said in a voice as quiet as the grave. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" Naruto asked, his voice coming out calmer than he felt. "I am Sabaka no Gaara," the boy answered, again in that dry whisper. "I am here to participate in the Chunin exam." Hinata edged to his left. Out of the corner of his eye, Naruto could see her Byakugan activated. He resisted the urge to move between her and the sand shinobi again. But when Gaara's eyes moved toward her, Naruto spoke up to keep the attention focused on him. "Maybe I'll see you in the exam then," he said in a mocking voice. Gaara nodded, either missing or ignoring the sarcasm. "I didn't know Konoha had created its own weapon. You and I will fight in this exam. And then I will kill you." Gaara smiled then, and Naruto had to revise his most terrifying experience list again. Those teal-colored eyes held no hint of sanity. "Maybe, maybe not," Naruto said lightly. "But in the meantime, I need to escort the lady home. Enjoy the moonlight." With that, he turned toward his teammate, making finger signs with his left hand the moment it was concealed by his body. Hinata nodded and leapt away, Naruto following close behind her. He wasn't comfortable turning his back on this Gaara, who whatever he was, even if they were fairly far away. But the boy didn't seem ready to fight just yet, so Naruto kept his own tone as casual as possible. It seemed to work because they landed on the next roof unmolested. "Let's get you home," Naruto said urgently. Kurenai-sensei was right. With all these strangers in Konoha, this isn't a good idea. Hinata didn't look happy about it, but she nodded in agreement. Oh. Kurenai was a little exasperated to hear of her students' late-night encounter with the foreign shinobi. She'd asked them to avoid late-night training just to prevent such an encounter, but it was also gratifying that they didn't hesitate to reveal their disobedience. But to end up in a life-threatening situation over a game of tag. She looked at them again, taking in the uncomfortable postures, Naruto's scowl, and Hinata's nervous fingers, and suppressed a sigh. Sometimes it was easy to forget that they were still kids in some ways. A genin was mostly an adult, at least in the eyes of the village, but the trappings of childhood were not so easily shed. And in these two cases, she was sure either of them had experienced much of a childhood in the first place. And a late-night game of tag, conducted with sufficient stealth to apparently startle an ANBU, was hardly defiance of her orders. They merely had the bad luck to encounter an unusually frightening competitor on that rooftop. "Thank you for telling me this," Kurenai said. "In the future, you should probably not wander around after dark, especially if there is a chance that this Gaara person may seek you out. I'll see what I can find out about him." Naruto nodded, but the troubled look on his face persisted. "He said that I was like him," he said in a quiet voice, "and that he didn't know that Konoha had created its own weapon." Kurenai stared at her student. There were possibilities implied in those words, possibilities too awful to speculate about. "Ayano," Hinata interjected, flinching slightly when they both turned toward her. "And Naruto, when I looked at him with the Byakugan, there was some gold-colored chakra mixed in with his." "Like me," Naruto echoed. "He has a demon like me?" Kurenai nodded, her mind now racing at the possibilities. She had no idea how powerful it might be, but this was something the Hokage needed to know immediately. "Hardly like you in most respects," Shino objected. "You do not display an excessive amount of bloodlust, nor are you given toward idle threats." He paused. "This Gaara also seems to demonstrate a certain economy with his words that you lack." Naruto blinked. "So he speaks better than I do? Thanks a lot, Shino." He smiled at his impassive teammate. But Hinata still appeared troubled. "And you don't see yourself as a weapon, Naruto-kun, but that's what he called himself," she said, her brows stitched with anguish. "That's right," Naruto agreed, frowning. What Hinata's voice trailed off as she stared into space. She swallowed. "What would it be like, Naruto-kun, if you had no one like us, like Irika-sensei, like the Hokage-sama? What if everyone hated and feared you, and no one accepted you?" Kurenai's mind, augmented by her studies of the human mind for advanced, came to a conclusion first. But she held her tongue to see if the others would figure it out on their own. Surprisingly, Naruto answered first. "I think I'd probably hate them back." "Do you think that's what happened to him?" Hinata nodded slowly. "However," Shino interjected, "that does not make him less dangerous." "I agree," Kurenai added. "I would suggest that you avoid him at all costs during the exam. I need to go speak to the Hokage, so you are released from your duties today. I think this constitutes an even stronger reason to avoid being outside for long after dark." "Do you think it will be alright to train within our homes?" Hinata asked quickly. Kurenai nodded. "I think that will be fine. Tomorrow we will go over some things that might help you on the exam. I take it all three of you are still interested in taking it?" After they nodded, Kurenai dismissed them and made her way to the Hokage's tower at a rather quick walk. Anything more would have drawn potentially hostile attention. "Oh. This kind of sucks," Naruto muttered as they walked toward Moritake's. He'd pressed for ramen, but been outvoted. "We've eaten at Ichiraku's 4 times in the past 2 weeks, Shino observed, with just a hint of tolerant amusement. "I don't mean where we're going for lunch," Naruto snapped irritably. "I mean we have to cut back our training." It was like Shino didn't think he was capable of worrying about something besides ramen. Wonderful, hot, savory ramen. "It will not heavily impact my new training regimen," Shino observed. Out of the corner of his eye, Naruto noticed him rolling his shoulders slightly. "Didn't Misato say something about weapons training?" Yeah, but that's just because you can train at home, Naruto countered, rolling his eyes. Ayano, Hinata stammered. See, could we not train at your apartment? She asked. Naruto paused as he struggled to absorb the idea. It's not very big, he objected. We can still work on chakra control, Hinata insisted. Perhaps some light sparring, she continued. We won't really have much room to maneuver, Naruto said with an embarrassed catch in his voice. His apartment was nothing to brag about. Sometimes combat occurs in close quarters, Shino countered, so it might be useful to practice in such a setting. My new instructor has me practice my forms in our basement, which is filled with incubation equipment. Naruto nodded slowly, but was even more convinced by the obvious relief Hinata was displaying. She was actually pretty good at hiding things when she tried, but he was slowly getting better at reading her. He didn't have to be a genius shinobi to realize that she'd rather train than be around her family, so even cramped quarters at his place would be preferable. He'd just have to make sure he cleaned up and didn't leave any dirty underwear on the floor. Oh. Kurenai sighed as she left the Hokage's office. He'd been highly concerned when she reported Naruto's encounter with the Suna boy Gaara. But it wasn't like they could summarily dismiss him from the exam not without a serious explanation. He was the youngest son of the Kazekage, which only complicated things. Even if Suna was a nominal ally of Konoha, their entering a demon host, especially one as bloodthirsty as this Gaara seemed to be, would be like dumping a piranha in a goldfish bowl. But if they objected to his presence, they'd have to explain how they knew, and Gaara's words only made sense if one knew that Naruto was a Jinchuriki as well. Barring one without barring both of them would be seen as the worst kind of favoritism, and the Hokage was not willing to reveal Naruto's secret to the leaders of the other delegations. There were already rumors of the shadowy Akatsuki organization taking an interest in Konoha, and there was nothing to be gained by adding fuel to that fire. But they would be on their guard at least. Team 8 had fulfilled its primary function as a recon team, finding out important information and reporting it to the Hokage. Using that information correctly was their leader's responsibility. She only hoped he made the right decision. Oh. The day of the exam dawned with typical Konoha weather, bright sunshine and a hint of coolness on the breeze, weather that made Naruto want to stay outside all day and half the night. He met Shino and Hinata at their training ground in a frame of mind that was not really conducive to taking a long test. He'd been bouncing on the balls of his feet, bursting with nervous tension since he left his apartment. This was it, really, the first step on his path to becoming Hokage and making everyone acknowledge him. How could he possibly remain calm? Everything was changing, even his morning training sessions with Guy, Lee, and Hinata. The last couple of days, instead of pounding each other into the dirt, they did light warm-ups, advanced forms, and attended an informal seminar on battlefield tactics. The latter showed Naruto something he was only beginning to understand. Mato Guy was a lot smarter than his wardrobe or haircut suggested. Outside of his enthusiasm, that could be just as ruthless as a mission called for. And since he focused on taijutsu, he'd given a lot of thought on how to handle multiple opponents, how to deal with long-range attacks, and how to neutralize an enemy's advantages. Naruto was a little uncomfortable with the thought that Guy-sensei might be helping them beat his own team if the Chunin examination included head-to-head competition. He knew that Tenten was getting some special training from Kurenai, but he still realized that Guy was going far beyond the original bargain. It wasn't until the end of the last session that Guy became very serious, and Naruto came to understand his reasoning. Tomorrow you will be entering the Chunin examination, he said as they sprawled on the grass after performing what he called simple cool-down exercises, which most people would probably consider to be an entire workout on their own. While you three will be better prepared than many genin, and your power of youth will shine very brightly for all to see. Guy stopped and visibly restrained himself from going off on that all-too-familiar tangent. Keep in mind that the examination itself can be very dangerous. Do not underestimate your opponents, but more importantly, do not forget who your friends are. He paused, seeming to take in their curious looks. Even though the exam is being held here in Konoha, there will be many participants from other villages. Some of them may not hold very honorable intentions, and may seek to harm or kill another competitor to give them an edge. Although not encouraged, this is not strictly against the rules the hidden villages all agreed to. Guy drew those incredibly thick eyebrows down into a fair approximation of a frown. Please watch out for your fellow shinobi during the exam. Even the strongest rivalry should be put away when facing shinobi from another village. That is one of the Leaf's greatest strengths. If we forget that, then we have truly turned our backs on the power of youth. That's when it really struck Naruto. Guy wanted them all to pass, everyone from Konoha. And if they helped each other as he asked, then that would improve the chances for Niji, Tenten, and Lee as well. Naruto, stunned by this unexpected complexity, just nodded vigorously. Guy gave him one of those blinding smiles that made Naruto want to go buy toothpaste. Still, such sobering thoughts couldn't compete with Naruto's competitive nature, so he was wound as tight as a spring when he met his teammates. Of course, if Shino had any concerns about the exam, he wasn't showing any of it. Sometimes the Aburame boys' calm deliberation was more irritating than the entire Konohamaru Corps on a sugar high. For an instant, Naruto wondered if he realized that and just did it on purpose. No, not possible, he decided as he turned toward Hinata, who just entered the clearing as well. For once, she was able to meet his eyes without looking away. She was standing a little straighter than usual as well. Naruto softly exhaled the breath he didn't know he'd been holding. She was so calm and centered that he couldn't help but absorb some of that himself. For some reason, just her presence seemed to relieve his nervous agitation. The chakra control exercises she'd led him through definitely benefited from that. Even that pesky red chakra seemed to behave itself better under her watchful eye. Naruto had lost count of how many times he'd cast the water summoning into his sink, but bit by bit his control had improved. He was able to further reduce the amount of chakra he molded into the technique, while reducing the amount of time it took to complete the seals. Of course, his progress was nowhere near even. The first time he made a breakthrough, his elation caused it to spiral out of control, spraying water across his small kitchen. Interestingly enough, when this happened, Hinata threw up her hands in reflex, and the spray of water seemed to split, and mostly flow around her instead of soaking her jacket. "Are we ready to go?" Hinata asked softly, jolting Naruto out of his reverie. He nodded, hoping he hadn't been staring at her or something weird. He stayed quiet as they walked toward their destination. Kurenai-sensei said that all that had been drafted to help with the exam, but that she hoped to see them in the later stages. As they entered the building where the exam was being held, Naruto felt uncomfortable, almost like someone was watching him. His suspicions were borne out as they climbed the stairs and Hinata whispered genjutsu in a voice that barely carried as far as her teammates' ears. As they approached room 301, or what looked like it anyway, there was a crowd of younger shinobi gathered outside the door. Two rough-looking older genin had just finished knocking Lee and Tenten back as Team 7 objected. "We're doing you kids a favor, keeping you out," one of the older genin said. "None of you look like you can handle us, let alone a test that makes some people forever give up being a shinobi, or just kills them." "That's a sound argument," Sasuke said in a challenging voice, "but I will pass. And undo this field you've created using an illusionary technique. I want to go to the 3rd floor." Naruto noted the small smile on Tenten's lips as they walked up to the altercation. Evidently she'd spotted it as well. He began concentrating chakra in his center. Something was a little fishy about those genin. Sasuke and the unnamed genin started to exchange kicks when Lee appeared between them in a flash of green, grabbing their legs while the kicks were still chambered. For a stunned moment, both Sasuke and the genin were held in place until Lee released their legs and they had to back off to retain their balance. Naruto released the chakra pulse while everyone's attention was focused on the aborted fight. He frowned. He'd barely pushed anything into it, and the pulse still washed across the hallway and probably enveloped the whole building. Still, it did what it was supposed to do. The two suspicious genin were revealed as adult chunin in the gray uniforms of examination proctors. Niji, who was starting to rebuke Lee for showing off, turned and glared at Naruto before turning back to his teammate. Naruto gave him a jaunty wave, guessing he'd figured out where the pulse had come from. Too bad his Byakugan hadn't been on, so it could have blinded him for a bit. Hinata's cousin was way too arrogant for his own good. "Evidently the exam actually began the moment we entered the building," Shino observed. "And we should expect other parts to not be as they seem," Hinata added. Naruto grunted and nodded, but his attention was more focused on Rock Lee. His cheeks were bright red as he asked Sakura out on a date. She turned him down, of course, glancing sidelong at Sasuke as if to see whether he was jealous of the attention paid to her. Naruto noted with a sinking stomach that it only seemed to fire up Lee's determination. He saw Lee speak briefly with his teammates as the crowd split up, now ignoring the amused chunin, one of which was openly smirking at Naruto. When Lee followed Team 7, Naruto knew he had to do something. I'll meet you on the third floor, he said quickly as he took off after Lee. Fortunately, he managed to catch his friend right after he challenged Sasuke to a fight. Excuse us, he said as he dragged Lee around the corner and down the hall out of sight of Team 7. Naruto, Lee said, struggling to remove his elbow from Naruto's grasp. Why are you interfering? Lee, have you forgotten what Guy-sensei said? Naruto snapped. Those were words he never thought he'd say. Lee flinched like he had been struck by a heavy blow. The test has begun, Naruto said quietly. They are still Konoha shinobi, even if Sasuke is a jerk. We don't fight allies. Not in this kind of situation. Lee looked down. Naruto thought he looked unusually subdued. After the exam, I will run 200. Lee, Naruto said quickly, why did you want to fight Sasuke so badly? Lee didn't say anything, but let out a heartbroken sigh. Naruto massaged his forehead with his free hand. Sakura. He wanted to impress Sakura. Lee, we're friends, right? Friends and eternal rivals, like Guy-sensei and that terribly cool and hip Kakashi. I thought Neji was your rival. He is too cold, Naruto-san. I want a rival that burns with the fires of youth as hotly as I do. Ah. Right. Okay, well, even as a rival. Well, you know, Lee, some things transcend rivalry. What do you mean? I mean being a guy, Lee. We're both guys, right? Yash. Right. So, as one guy to another, I have to warn you about Sakura. I used to like her a lot, before I got to know her. Sakura isn't as nice as she seems. She only likes one person and she doesn't really give a damn about anyone else. I don't want to see you waste your time on her like I did. She just isn't worth it. Oh, Naruto, you sound so bitter. Surely the power of youth has not left you forlorn? One of these days that stuff's going to make sense to me, and then I'll know I'm in trouble. Look, Lee, as your friend, as your rival, I'd rather see you pursue someone nicer than that. Take my advice or not, but if you don't, you'll come to regret it. I will think about what you have said, Naruto-san, but I find it troubling. She is so beautiful, I know, me too. Lee looked down at his elbow and Naruto released it with a sheepish grin. We better get going before our teams kill us for making them late, the short-statured blonde said. Oh. Neither shinobi noticed the pink-haired girl leaning against the wall around the corner from where they'd held their discussion. Her bright green eyes were clouded over and her face held an expression of chagrin. Even her inner self was decidedly subdued. Neither boy had said anything that inner Sakura could really get angry about. Naruto thought she was beautiful, but wasn't very nice. And he was concerned that if Rock Lee pursued her, then he would be hurt as well. This coming from the boy who'd always pestered her for dates while they were at the academy. But that had stopped the day they were assigned to their teams. Belatedly, she began to wonder if she'd hurt him with her constant rejections. It wasn't all her fault, though. It's not like she was obligated to go out with him just because he asked. And she didn't want to spoil her chances with Sasuke-kun. Unbidden, memories of some of her more forceful rejections came to mind, burning away a lot of her self-justifications. I'm not a very nice person, she whispered to herself. Her voice seemed unnaturally loud in the empty hallway. Oh. After taking a shortcut that wasn't, Naruto and Lee caught up to their respective teams right outside the examination room. Surprisingly, Kurenai-sensei and Guy-sensei were there as well. I'm glad you decided to join us, the red-eyed said in a slightly sarcastic manner. Sorry, Naruto said. I needed to talk to Lee about something. Kurenai raised an eyebrow. I hope it was important, because you two have kept both teams waiting. Naruto glanced at Lee out of the corner of his eye. The green-clad genin's eyes were locked onto his teacher, who was standing slightly behind Kurenai, giving them a discreet thumbs up. It kind of was, he said slowly, hoping Kurenai didn't immediately press him for details. She'd seemed a little extra irritable lately. It's better, since your teammates cannot enter without you, she replied dryly. What if not all of us wish to enter the exam? Shino asked. Genin can only enter the exam as an entire team, Kurenai clarified. But then why did you tell us? Naruto started to ask, but his voice trailed off as he put the pieces together. You wanted to make sure all three of us really wanted to test. It wasn't a question. Kurenai nodded, smiling slightly. Very good, Naruto, she congratulated him. His sensei didn't go into wild histrionics like Guy, but her simple words of approval warmed Naruto, almost making him blush. Teammates stood politely aside while Guy ushered his team into the exam room. Naruto made a point of ignoring Hyuga Niji and the cold glares he shot at them. He didn't know if it was Hinata, or if the boy somehow held him responsible for Lee's drunken rampage. Naruto was completely innocent of that fiasco. However, he had to admit that if he'd known Lee would beat the snot out of the arrogant Hyuga when liquored up, he'd have made sure it happened. Frequently. I want you three to be careful in there, Kurenai said in a voice little more than a whisper. For political reasons, we can't exclude this Gaara person from the exam. So I want you three to avoid him at all costs, is that understood? Naruto nodded along with the rest, but privately he wasn't sure Gaara would cooperate. The odd boy seemed almost indecently focused on Naruto after he realized Naruto's secret. Then good luck, she whispered as she opened the door for them. Objectively, Naruto realized that there would be a lot of participants in the Chunin exam. Subjectively, he wasn't completely prepared to have almost 100 pairs of unfriendly eyes locked onto him the moment he stepped into the testing room. Naruto found his feet moving without thought, placing himself between his team and the potential hostiles, while his fists clenched and his face twisted into a ferocious scowl. The closest genin immediately backed up a couple of steps and Naruto wondered if they were jockeying for room in which to attack. Don't even think about it, he snapped, a muscle along his jaw jumping with nervous tension. Naruto! Stop making a scene, it's far too troublesome, a bored-sounding voice snapped him out of his focus. Naruto eased back out of the combat stance he dropped into and turned toward the familiar-sounding voice. Clumped together beside the door were the members of Team 7, Team 10, and Team Guy who just preceded them into the room. Shikamaru was leaning against the wall while Choji stood next to him working on a bag of chips. Ino was talking to Sakura, and they weren't arguing for once. In fact, Sakura seemed oddly subdued. On the other hand, Kiba was talking to Akamaru, who seemed oddly agitated. Sasuke and Niji were both giving him strange looks as well. Tenten seemed to be whispering a question to Niji, but wasn't getting an answer. At least Lee seemed somewhat normal for him anyway, and wasn't visibly pursuing Sakura, to Naruto's relief. Cautiously, Team 8 went to stand with the other rookies. Technically Team Guy wasn't a rookie squad, but they were only a year older. The older genin seemed to resent our presence, Shino observed. Well, duh, Kiba said, placing a rather nervous-looking dog back on top of his hood. If you had to wait 3 or 4 years before your sensei let you take the Chunin exam, people like us would make you look bad. Shino paused, seeming to stare at the Inuzuka boy. Naruto wondered if his teammate was becoming more expressive, or if he was just learning to read him better. That is completely irrational, Shino finally said in an annoyed tone. Maybe he was just becoming more irritable. Kiba just shrugged. You tell them that. We'll give you an honorable burial, he said with a tight grin. Not a chance, Naruto snapped, his former anger returning. No wonder he was jumpy with all the ill-concealed hostility in the room. Anyone laying a hand on his team better be prepared to have it ripped off. Ayano, Hinata said hesitantly. I think he was just kidding. It's a miracle, Kiba said with wide eyes and a taunting grin. She talks. That crack got him a glare from Shino, which he ignored, and a blush from Hinata, which widened his grin. What it got from Naruto was a narrowing of his eyes and a low growl that seemed to rumble from his chest of its own accord. Akamaru suddenly let out a low whine and made a series of sharp, high-pitched barks. Kiba's eyes widened slightly and then he made a face. It was just a joke, he said with disgust, get a grip. Your alleged sense of humor leaves much to be desired, Shino said in a dry tone. Yeah, Kiba said dismissively, waving a hand as he turned and began bothering Sasuke. Hey you guys, an unfamiliar voice called out. You should quiet down a little. Naruto turned along with the rest to see a silver-haired genin approach. Despite his hair, he only appeared to be a few years older. So you're the rookies that just graduated from the academy, correct? No one answered him immediately, but he continued. You're all fooling around, this isn't a field trip. His dismissive tone seemed to irk several of them, but Yamanaka Ino was quickest to reply. Who are you to tell us that? she demanded. I am Yakushi Kabuto, the young man answered, and if you look around you'll see that everyone is on edge. I don't want to see you get singled out. I guess you can't help it, being rookies and not knowing anything. It reminds me of how I was when I first took the exam. Kabuto-san? Sakura asked hesitantly. Is this your second time taking the exam? No, he answered. My seventh. Does that mean you know a lot about the exam? She asked with a hopeful smile. Yes, I suppose it does, Kabuto said with an embarrassed grin. More like he knows how to fail the exam, Shikamaru observed in a bored tone. If the exam is that difficult, it's going to be even more troublesome. Kabuto seemed a little nonplussed about the abrupt dismissal, so he upped the ante. Maybe I should give you kids some information then, with these recognition cards. Naruto tensed as Kabuto reached into his kunai pouch, but he only pulled out some orange and black cards. These have information I'd burned into them using my chakra, he said. I've collected information on this exam for the last 4 years on these 200 cards. They appear blank, and cannot be read without my chakra. He knelt down and began to turn one on the floor with an extended finger. After a moment, there was a soft pop and a cloud of smoke blew away from the card to reveal a map of the region. On the legend was a tally of the genin entered by each country participating in the exam. As Kabuto began to hold forth on the purpose of the Chunin exams, and how they help maintain the balance of power, Naruto was thinking. Why was this guy being so helpful? Was he a friend of one of their senseis? When he tried to look underneath it made him a little uneasy. Others might accept a complete stranger helping them out of the goodness of his heart, but Naruto knew that happened pretty seldom, even in Konoha, which Kurenai said was often denigrated by other hidden villages for being too soft. Naruto was wondering what, if anything, he should do about his half-formed suspicions when Sasuke spoke up for the first time. Are there any cards that have detailed personal information? Kabuto admitted that they did, and Sasuke asked to see information on Rock Lee and Gaara, earning him a quick look from Naruto. It was a little rude to ask for information on Lee right in front of him, but Naruto wondered how Sasuke even knew Gaara's name. Had he run into the boy as well? Or had his warned him to stay away from the Suna genin at all costs? Naruto doubted Kurenai would have kept information to herself if it could potentially save the life of an ally, and Naruto had a feeling that anyone going after Sabaku no Gaara unprepared was risking everything. Naruto wondered if he should add his own warning. But how could he reveal what he knew of Gaara without exposing himself? And would the arrogant Uchiha even believe him? Thankfully, the sketchy information that Kabuto had regarding Gaara was enough to make anyone cautious. Completing a B-ranked mission as a genin was almost unheard of, going by Kabuto's expression. The total lack of information regarding the foreign shinobi's capabilities was also an effective warning. Concealed abilities were almost always more dangerous than known ones. And never having been injured on a mission was downright scary. To top things off on the anxiety scale, Kabuto then went into a big explanation of how 5 other villages sent their best genin to compete in this Chunin exam. To compete against a bunch of genin who'd only left the academy a few months ago. Out of the corner of his eye, Naruto saw Hinata looking down. Even Rock Lee looked a little hesitant. Oh no, this would not do. Good, Naruto said in a loud voice, making everyone around him jump. If this was easy, then making Chunin would mean nothing. Strong opponents mean we get to really show what we can do. Right, Hinata? He added the last while gently elbowing his teammate. Hinata's head shot up. Hi! She chirped, her cheeks already coloring. Naruto gave her a warm smile that seemed to fluster her even worse, and then turned to his other teammate. Right, Shino? Shino adjusted his glasses calmly, but Naruto thought he could detect a quiet buzzing coming from the Aburain boy. With his arm raised, Naruto noticed that the sleeves of his jacket were cut wider than normal. He had a strong suspicion there was more than just arms in there. That is correct, Naruto, Shino said, his voice a bit louder than usual. Good, Naruto said. He then turned toward the nearest older genin, who, although they wore Konoha Hittite, seemed just as hostile as the foreign shinobi. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, future Hokage of Konoha, and if you have a problem with me being here, form a line, he roared. The rest of the Rookie 9 and Team Guy were all staring at him incredulously. Ino asked him what the hell he thought he was doing, but he turned them all out. His attention was on 2 things. The first was the small smile of approval Hinata gave him. The second was the pair of genin with hidden sound Hittite making their way toward the group of Konohanin at high speed. The two sound males appeared to be setting up a combo attack on Kabuto. Even if the older genin was a little patronizing, he was still a Konoha shinobi. As the skinny guy leapt over the crowd and sent a pair of throwing kunai at the silver-haired genin, Naruto was already in motion. Grabbing a thrown kunai out of the air was usually an iffy proposition, given how much of it was sharp and how little of it was safe to grab. But if he just deflected them, they were likely to hit one of the foreign genin and undoubtedly spark a general brawl. Fortunately, Naruto's timing was just right and he was able to grab the handles of the kunai as his path crossed theirs. One sharp edge dug into the palm of his fingerless gloves, but didn't penetrate. Of course, the quick motion of his arms made his body begin tumbling as it continued to fly toward the ceiling. With a wrenching twist, Naruto managed to get his feet to hit the ceiling first, and charged with chakra they held him there upside down. The bulky sound genin was still heading toward Kabuto, but without the thrown kunai backing his target up into the wall, the sound genin had to alter his path to cut through the Konoha rookies. His arm was drawn back for a haymaker swing at the silver-haired genin when Shino stepped into the arc, his own forearm held vertical, the heel of his hand turned outward. The genin's arms clashed with an audible clang, but surprisingly, Shino did not move an inch. The sound genin's one visible eye glared at Shino, but the Aburame genius seemed completely unaffected. "This is unseemly," Shino said, as if he were discussing Naruto's table manners at Ichiraku's. The sound genin's eye narrowed and his other hand moved under his cloak. "Please stop," Hinata said softly as she appeared by Shino's side, her palm extended, glowing with chakra, less than an inch from the bandages that covered most of the sound genin's face. The bulky genin froze in place, and then slowly straightened. Looking down from the ceiling, Naruto also saw Sasuke palm a pair of kunai, Kiba edging around for a better angle, Neji holding Lee back from the fight, and Shikamaru, of all people, standing there with a look of focused concentration on his face. The shadows cast by the overhead lights seemed to be pulled around the Nara boy's feet. The skinny sound genin landed next to his comrade. Hidden Sound is not a minor village. And we don't need to all gang up on someone to stop them, either, he spat, glaring at the rookies. Naruto released the chakra in his feet and jumped down from the ceiling behind the sound genin. To their credit, either of them jumped at the sudden noise. With a smile he casually handed the kunai back to their owner, who was visibly seething. "You speak of our greatest strength as a weakness," Shino said urbanely. "I find myself pitying you. And if either of you want a piece of me, the offer is still open," Naruto said in a low voice. The lack of intensive physical training the last few days had left him fidgety, and just a little irritable too. Just then there was a loud explosion and smoke billowed from the front of the examination room. "Quiet down, you punks!" a rough voice bellowed. When the smoke dissipated, Naruto saw a tall scar-faced man sporting a Konoha Hittite and a black trenchcoat. Flanking him was a squad of Chunin dressed in proctor's uniforms, including the two clowns he'd uncovered earlier. "Sorry to keep you waiting," the man, who appeared to be a special joining of some sort, continued in a smoother voice. "I am the examiner of the first test of the Chunin selection exam, Marino Ibiki." Author's notes. I'd like to thank both the genius that is runs amok and the incredible and decidedly insane Bibliophile 20 for their absolutely wonderful beta work. They made me add this grin. Before you asked, the preliminary exams in canon didn't happen because Iruka wasn't at the meeting to protest the Rookie 9 being entered in the Chunin exam. And a trio of affirmatives today. Yes, I'm back. Some of this was surprisingly hard to put together, and real life, which is highly overrated, wasn't very cooperative at all. Yes, things are a little different than the canon scenes, but I'm sure if you look at everything you will realize why. Yes, the title of this chapter is an intentional pun. My Dinner with Andre was a movie released back in 1981. And yes, I'm including the Team 8 Omake winners from the contest on my blog. Link is in my profile. The winner is Wolfgang Buehlen, who wrote a scene that seemed to match the narrative tone of Team 8 the best. Among the shinobi of Konoha, most tended to have rather clear and defined images of their fellow ninja, sometimes even to the point where a person was defined by the very same picture people had of her, in lieu of what she really was like. It was so common, in fact, that the few ninja who knew better could not help but to shake their heads and ask themselves what had become of looking underneath the underneath. especially when there were more than just a few cases, with some of them being of village-wide renown. Uzumaki Naruto, of course, was a prime example, with the image of a goofy, orange-clad prankster so deeply ingrained in people's minds that few could even start to imagine him as a solemn and capable ninja. The hyperactive Mitarashi Enko was another surprise, when people heard about her interest in tea ceremonies and tried to envision her wearing a traditional kimono and partaking in such a formal and ritualistic event. Others were of far less renown, like Inazuka-tsum. With her feral look caused by her facial tattoos, shaggy hair, and her pronounced canines, it was easy to envision her on a battlefield, tearing some enemy limb from limb with her dog companion Kuramaru at her side. Some people even went as far as picturing how she tore out someone's throat with her bare teeth. The thought of her as a loving mother and housewife seemed pretty ridiculous in comparison. Therefore, more than just a few people would have stopped dead in their tracks and made a double take at the sight of the Inazuka woman wearing a green apron in front of her kitchen's hearth and cooking a meal. 2 meals, in fact, one for her son and another one for Akamaru. Originally, she had intended this as a small celebration of her son's first C-rank mission's completion. And while this hadn't exactly changed, it now had the added purpose of lifting Kiba's spirits a bit and distracting him from the mission's sad outcome. "How much longer, Mom?" "Just a few minutes. And the more you ask, the longer it'll be," she replied. As far as it seemed, her distraction was working. After recounting his tale of the mission, Kiba was now fully concentrated on the fact that his mother was preparing the favorite foods of both him and Akamaru, and played impatiently with his chopsticks. In the meanwhile, the small white dog was still busy relaying his own point of view on the events to Kuramaru, who interjected at several points with questions or comments of his own. The result was a conversation that consisted of innumerable low barks, yips, growls, and similar sounds only an Inazuka would be able to decipher. Right now, though, Kiba was too preoccupied with his meal, and Sim only listened half-heartedly as she checked the pot with Akamaru's food. "How's your team coming along after this?" Sasuke's trying to act like a cold and indifferent jerk, Kiba began and muttered as always under his breath before he continued. "But I can tell that it's bothering him. Sakura said that he expects a lot from himself, so he's probably both angry and disappointed that it didn't go very well. And Sakura, well, she's very down as well. Even more than Sasuke, in fact." "How come?" Although she was busy preparing the meal, her question was proof that she still paid attention to her son. He paused to scratch his cheek while thinking of an answer. In the background, he could hear Akamaru's and Kuramaru's chatter, without really listening to them. "I think she's pretty disappointed in herself, even more so than Sasuke. Most of the time, she couldn't do much besides covering Tazuna-san. Sasuke, Kakashi-sensei and I handled the fighting against the enemy ninja. I guess she might have felt, well, useless. And maybe she's disappointed in Sasuke as well. Or rather, in the fact that he didn't live up to the image she had of him." He shrugged. "She tries to cover her worries by behaving as violent and aggressive as usual, though. She's not unlike Sis in that manner. Don't tell her I said that, though." "Tell what to whom?" Upon hearing the voice of his very own sister as she entered the room, Kiba shot a pleading glance towards his mother. Sim just gave him a smile. "Nothing. Just that both you and Sakura are violent and aggressive." Chuckling to herself, she returned her attention toward the food she prepared and listened to the squabble between her 2 children that ensued. It ended soon enough, as this kind of fight often did, and she finally got the opportunity to put the meal on the table. She noticed that Akamaru was still busy telling his story to Kuramaru, though he seemed to slowly reach the end. "It seems this year's got some strong and interesting pups," Kuramaru mentioned in the human tongue as soon as Akamaru had finished his story. Turning towards his partner, he was met with a questioning look. "Kiba and his pack, now, and the pack we met on the hunt a few days ago," he elaborated in response. Sim spent a few moments searching through her memory before her eyes lit up in understanding. "Ah, you mean Kurenai's team." Kiba stopped in his meal to throw his mother a questioning look. "Naruto, Hinata, and Shino? I met them on the way back. What's with them?" "They were on a border patrol mission just a few days ago, and we ran into them during a rescue mission." "Didn't they tell you?" she asked with her eyebrows raised in surprise. From what she had heard about them from Kiba's school stories, she would have expected for Naruto to brag about the events, at least. Shrugging slightly, she began to fill in Kiba on what happened. 3 missing Nin, a B to A rank, kidnapped 2 inhabitants of our village and escaped toward the border that Kurenai's team patrolled. They intercepted the missing Nin and defeated them shortly before the rescue team that I was a part of arrived. I don't know the details, but Naruto killed at least one of them. Naruto killed one of them? Kiba asked in disbelief with such a funny face that Sum couldn't help but let out a bark of laughter that was joined by her daughter. I wouldn't believe it myself, if Kuramura hadn't told me. Hana supported her mother's claim, although her attention was more focused on Akamaru. The exchange between her mother and little brother didn't interest her too much, since she had already heard the story from her mother a couple of days earlier. Instead, she beckoned the white dog to come to her and bribed him with a few pieces of meat from her food to tell her about the mission he and Kiba had just returned from. Although he had his very own meal, the prospect of some extra food made him happy to comply. He smelt of fresh blood, Kuramura explained in the meantime to Kiba. As he opened his mouth, probably for some sort of protest, the canine interjected. Human blood. Apparently, the black dog wasn't too pleased with the fact that Kiba wanted to doubt either his nose or his statement. I guess you'll have to ask them yourself, if you want the whole story. We had to return to Konoha immediately after retrieving the 2 kidnappees from Kurenai's team. I didn't even have the time to taste the cooking of the Hyuga girl. In the last sentence, Sum muttered more to herself than to her son. Damn that Hayashi. Who would have been hurt if they had stayed and rested for a night, or a few hours at least. Hinata had seemed like she did her very best to prepare a good meal for them, and from the appetizing look and smell it had, she had done a damn good job at it. Somehow, it seemed like Hayashi went out of his way to make his daughter feel miserable, which was something Sum couldn't even begin to wrap her head around. Meanwhile, Kiba stared down at his meal with a mixture of emotions. Disbelief and anger were the prevalent ones, with a good deal of confusion thrown in as well. He and Sasuke had fought and bled and cursed together just to bring down a single enemy Nin, whereas Naruto managed not only to defeat one as well, but completely on his own if what Kuramura had told him was true. That just couldn't be right. After all, Naruto had been a complete loser at the academy. As the moments passed, however, Kiba noted something entirely different. The fact that Naruto now seemed different from the one he remembered from the academy. When he met him today, he didn't brag about it like he should have without hesitation. And if he remembered the clash at the ramen bar correctly, Naruto didn't shout or scream at that time, either, and just left instead. Kiba wasn't sure what to make of all this, besides asking himself the obvious question, how much did you change exactly, Naruto? And the runner-up is Ale, who offered an intriguing look into the life of an Inuzuka. Inuzuka Kiba couldn't help a relieved smile as the delicious smells of meat stew and fresh leather home hit his nostrils. Comfortably snuggled into what was left of Kiba's jacket, Akamaru yowled sleepily, keeping his eyes closed. Kiba shared his companion's sentiment. He felt thrashed, not that he'd ever admit it. He envisioned a warm meal, and then a warmer bed, and he couldn't decide whether he was more hungry or tired. Kiba approached the cottage from the direction of the wind, letting it announce his arrival. He knew, from a previous unfortunate experience involving nighttime, a bet, and sake, that there was no way to creep past his family's noses and ears. Even if he could fool his sisters and the dogs, which in itself was no small feat, his mother or father would always know. Passing the last tree, he brushed his shoulder against it, leaving his mark while taking in his family. His mother was home, the tree's sense told him. His sisters were home earlier that morning. His father's trace was fainter than he remembered, still away, probably in the latest long-range mission with his hunter Nin uncles. As he entered the dining room, his gaze was drawn to the steaming bowl on the table, then to the left, where his mother Inuzuka was putting the finishing touches on a familiar-looking, brand-new piece of leatherwork. A smaller bowl was on the floor under his chair, and immediately Akamaru's head popped up from Kiba's collar, and he struggled to break free. They both sat down before their meal. "Welcome back, pup," Sim said, as she embraced him from behind. Kiba grunted gratefully, engrossed in the wonderful waft coming from the soup. Sim smiled and nudged his back, letting him know that he should tuck in. For the few seconds it took the pair to devour dinner, the room was silent. Then Sim refilled their plates and sat down as well. "How did it go?" Kiba mumbled fine, and paused between mouthfuls, looking back at the mission to find something he should say to quickly sum it up. For some reason, the image of his bed kept popping up in his mind. When he found something suitably impressive, he started gesturing and talking. Akamaru was amazing. You should have seen it when a missing Nin was distracted. He chomped on his leg, and kept him still so Sasuke chibi, and I could nail him good. Some raised an eyebrow, saying nothing. The holes, and the smells of blood from Kiba's ruined clothes, still present even after his washing them, told of a brutal fight. There was her son's blood, far too much of it for her comfort, and she smelled his teammates, Akamaru and someone else as well. At that time she wasn't feeling particularly impressed with Kakashi's judgment. She reached down and lifted Akamaru up, closely examining his bruised body. "Good boy," she simply said, then she touched his muzzle with her nose and gave a good lick at his collar. Akamaru panted in adoration at what amounted to highest praise, then shot towards the kennel, eager to show off the pack leader's scent to his brothers and sisters. "I feel neglected now," Kiba joked, pouting, and Sim smirked at him. "See if that jacket fits you then," she said, pointing at her handiwork from before. Kiba couldn't suppress a grin as he passed his hand over the perfect fur. "Thanks, Mum. I'll try to make this one last longer." Sim considered letting her son rest. He seemed oddly subdued, which spoke of exhaustion, certainly, but what if there was something more? She took in his appearance, and made a decision. "Tell me everything." Kiba sighed. As he told her the full story, properly embellishing his own contribution, Kiba could detect his mother's alternating tension and relief, just as he knew she would sense his own elation and excitement. There were very few secrets in the Inuzuka clan. When both you and your family could easily smell strong emotions such as anger and fear and embarrassment, being anything less than straightforward was just futile. Which suited Kiba's character just fine, thank you very much, and in fact had a big part in forming such a character in the first place. "And then we got back," Kiba concluded. Sim got up and absently refilled his bowl a third time. Her son looked at her expression, and some of it suddenly made sense. "Is Kakashi-sensei in trouble?" he asked. She laughed and said, "We'll see," which Kiba correctly interpreted as a resounding yes. Then Sim got serious and asked, "When you found out the Leaf had been tricked into accepting the mission, you were given the choice to return. Why didn't you?" Kiba thought about what to say. The largest part of it, he knew, was that Inuzuka Kiba does not turn back from danger, especially not when his two teammates jump into the thick of it without hesitation. Such a revelation, he suspected, wouldn't go down well with his mother. But as he pondered more, he discovered another truth that he'd always known, just never recognized. And it did sound loads better. "That village that lied to us, they really needed our help, Mum." Sim didn't look at him then, but he didn't need her to. Just seeing her shoulders relax, Kiba immediately knew he had said just the right thing, and could imagine her lips had that light smile she made when she was either happy or proud, or both. And he thought, off the hook. "Go for me. Bed, here I come." It wasn't to be. Still looking away, Sim said, "Kiba, what does your father tell you is the best thing about the Inuzuka clan?" Kiba grinned. "That we can smell when a girl is in AU. Mum." Sim put the kettle back in the cupboard. "The other thing?" Kiba felt the growing lump on his head, grumbling. "Should have specified. It's that every Inuzuka knows his place in the pack." He cleared his throat and tried imitating his father's gruff voice. "It's not your nose, cub, but patience that is the key to tracking. The most powerful combat technique in the world is to wait until your opponent is asleep. And never, ever forget your place in the pack." Sim nodded. "Glad you listened to that. Go on." She kept looking at him, and when Kiba didn't add anything and just stared dumbly, she sighed. Kiba was trying his best to look thoughtful, but this was quickly turning into the kind of girly conversation that normally had him running for his life. However, he was also well aware of the fact that Inuzuka-san would not be deterred by anything, much less her son's utter lack of interest. He had to show an effort before his eventual escape. "Let me tell you something," Sim said eventually. "While you were on your mission, 3 missing Nins came to our village and kidnapped a Hyuga child and the Hokage's grandson. I took Kuramaru with me and we led the pursuit. The tracks showed they were running for the border, probably would have made it across before we got them, but they were intercepted by a few of your classmates. It was Kurina Yuhi's team." Sim knew she had her son's attention then. "Aburame, Hyuga and Uzumaki?" he asked. She nodded, and Kiba scoffed. "Well, that's probably why they seemed so down when I saw them, earlier today. They must have gotten their asses kicked pretty bad." Sim arched her eyebrow. "Actually, when we arrived, the hostages had already been rescued and all missing Nins were dead. And those 3 guys weren't exactly pushovers either. From what I gathered, the Aburame and Hyuga kids were in trouble early in the fight. The last enemy was killed by Kurenai after Uzumaki had dispatched the first two. Before his mission in Water Country, Kiba would have protested loudly by this time that he knew how Uzumaki Naruto was a next to useless ninja, and the only he mastered only made things worse by creating even more useless ninjas. Now, however, Kiba couldn't help but remember Naruto's somber expression, while finding a disturbingly similar feeling resonating in him. Naruto's wasn't the look of failure, it was the look of success, right after you got a glimpse of the attached price tag. While frantically trying to stamp down on his newfound respect for the fellow genin, Kiba realized that his mother hadn't stopped talking and he hadn't been listening. And that cute kid even prepared dinner for all of us. I was impressed. So, Kiba, some finished sagely, Kurenai's team is a good pack. Kiba nodded mutely, perfectly aware that there was something important his mother had been trying to convey, that had passed miles above his head. As he got up and reached his bed, he had an uncharacteristic buzzing in his head, which only grew louder as his body shut down. It didn't make sense. Kiba openly admired his parents. He loved being in Inuzuka and the huge world of sensation his blood and training opened for him. But he knew his role in Team 7, and it was nothing like Naruto's. He was the tracker, he would warn the others about danger, and Akamaru and him were handy in a fight. One day he would be just as strong as his father, which was more than enough to get things done. And that was it. All Naruto did was be loud and obnoxious and eat ramen. And he'd killed 2 missing nins. Big deal. After Hyuga and Aburame had been taken out, his mother said. It dawned on him right then, at the edge of sleep. It wasn't about fighting or anything else. What Naruto had done was protect his teammates. That was Naruto's place in the pack. The same as mine, he whispered. Inspired by his discovery, he turned it around in his head. Did he like it? Was it enough for him? Was it worth the trouble? Would it matter if his worth was recognized or not? Unbidden, images from the previous days came to mind. Kiba wondered at Sasuke's expression of triumph as those weird things appeared in his eyes, and he could suddenly see into the future. Kiba figured the future wasn't a happy place. Then Kiba stared at Sakura's tear-stained face as she broke down crying and hugged them both, her arms painfully constricting their necks, right after the tragedy on the bridge. The girl had muscles. Yeah, Kiba decided, it will have to do. He would keep his pack safe. After all, they wouldn't stand a chance without him. Chapter 12. Naruto stared down at his paper, holding his head in his hands. The rules, as explained by the Scarred Special Join, were pretty straightforward. The teams were split up into randomly assigned seats before the test papers were passed out. Everyone started with 10 points, but wrong answers cost a point for each question. Getting caught cheating cost you 2 points every time you were caught. Run out of points and get removed from the exam. Simple, right? Oh, and if you get a 0, your teammates fail as well. Just answer the questions and don't cheat, right? Except for the fact that Uzumaki Naruto was abysmally bad with written tests. They were the bane of his existence at the Konoha Ninja Academy. Practical exercises were different. He failed a lot of those too, but at least there was a chance. Sometimes he could figure out a way to succeed, or work around the rules. Like with the kunai throwing examination, Iruka hadn't specifically forbidden him to use an explosive tag, and the bullseye was certainly destroyed, even if he'd struck the target 3 inches to the left of center. But a written test, there was only one way to answer them correctly. No way to distract the examiner and move the starting line. And only one correct way to actually do the problem. No room for creativity at all. A drop of sweat rolled down Naruto's forehead and traced a path down his nose. He rubbed at it irritably. At least the first question wasn't multiple choice. The parabola, B, represents a shuriken's path after being thrown by an enemy ninja from a height of 7 meters. Calculate the strength of the enemy ninja that can be observed from the trajectory followed by the shuriken, and figure out the maximum throwing distance on flat ground. Explain your reasoning. Oh crap, he thought with horror, it's even worse, they want me to do math. Oh. Hinata leaned forward with her eyes closed, appearing to be lost in thought to an outside observer. This motion also caused her short hair to hang slightly forward along the sides of her face, as her hands moved under the desk. She also carefully twisted her concealed fingers into the seals that would activate her family blood limit, whispering Byakugan in a ghost of a whisper. Her chakra flow was so slow, and so controlled, that the students on either side of her didn't even look up. The bulging veins on her temples were now concealed by her hair, so she gave no outward sign as her closed eyes scanned the papers of nearby candidates. If she was going to cheat, as this test seemed to require, she was determined not to get caught. Finding one who seemed to have filled out most of his tests, she began memorizing his answers. Everything was going according to plan. She'd hoped when they began assigning seats that she'd be able to sit near Naruto-kun, but of course the random assignments would be altered to separate teammates. Much as she wished she could help her friends, she was confident that they would find some way to succeed. Oh. Shino nodded slightly as his spy returned. A specially bred subspecies of Kakai, it had extremely well-developed compound eyes to assist with reconnaissance missions. Unfortunately, its brain wasn't quite as well-developed. Though he could communicate with it easily by using one of his attuned queens, its conversational skills were as underdeveloped as those of his teammate when contemplating hot ramen. In addition, the flying insect's memory was only sufficient to memorize a single answer at a time. Though tedious to use, it was effective nonetheless. He only hoped that his teammates were also finding ways to succeed. A single zero would bar the entire team from progressing. Oh. Naruto sweated as he looked over the other test questions. None of them looked particularly easy. Most of them he felt he could eventually puzzle out given unlimited time or access to the right books, but he had neither at the moment. Why is this test so freaking hard? He asked himself, grinding his teeth in frustration. I don't think anyone in my class, except maybe Sakura, could answer all of these in time. Why did they even let us take this test? We're not going to get any experience if we fail in the first hour. That gave him pause, and Naruto's face went blank as he pondered this. Kurenai-sensei wouldn't put them into this situation if it was impossible, so there had to be a way around it. He went over the rules again, how the points were awarded and how points were deducted if you were caught cheating. Funny how lenient that was. Iruka-sensei would kick you out of the classroom if he caught you cheating on one of his tests. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Why is this test so hard, but easier on that one aspect? It's almost like they want to encourage I'm an idiot. This is a shinobi rank exam. They want to see how sneaky we can be. Right at that moment, one of the proctors called out a number, making Naruto jump in his seat. Number 52, you fail, he said in a bored tone. 17 and 43, you can follow your teammate out into the hall. Naruto glanced over at the Chunin as the angry genin filed out of the room. The predatory gleam in the older shinobi's eyes held a hint of triumph, but no anger or outrage. His suspicions were correct. The Chunin proctors were his real opponents. As more teams were eliminated, Naruto began to sweat harder. He needed to find the answers, but he kept his eyes on his own paper. Those proctors were not messing around. It wasn't until one of the shinobi wearing a Suna marker and lots of face paint asked to be excused that he got some inspiration. Less than a minute later, Naruto had the rough outlines of a plan worked out. He just wished he had Shino handy to look for flaws. What is it, 23? The young-looking proctor on his row said when Naruto raised his hand. I, need to go to the bathroom too, Naruto stammered. He grimaced and held his stomach. I think I drank some bad milk, he added. The proctor didn't react, other than to smoothly rise to his feet and gesture for Naruto to follow. Naruto wisely kept his eyes down for the most part, but out of the corner of his eye he saw Sakura look up, eyes widening in surprise, as they walked past. In a quiet voice, the proctor directed him to go down the stairs to the second floor, before proceeding down the hall. Naruto guessed that they wanted to make sure that he and Sunanin didn't come into contact. That was fine with him. If he was with Sabaka no Gaara, he was at least dangerous by proxy. But to Naruto's dismay, the proctor followed him into the bathroom, standing beside the sinks. Naruto clutched his stomach again and ducked into one of the stalls. Aware that the Chunin could see under the stall doors, Naruto dropped his trousers and sat down. He also pushed up the jacket sleeve on his left arm, leaving the skin of his forearm exposed. After pausing long enough to very carefully mold the chakra, he coughed loudly as his fingers formed the seals. There was a loud pop, immediately supplemented by Naruto placing his mouth on his forearm and blowing hard. The noise was deafening in the enclosed space as mist billowed out under the stall door. In a flash, Naruto fixed his sleeve and pulled his pants up. He flushed and opened the stall door and stepped out toward the sinks, in time to see the Chunin edging back from the smoke. Gomen, Naruto said as he quickly washed his hands, definitely some bad milk, but I'm lucky it was just gas. I wouldn't want to do that in the middle of the exam though. The Chunin didn't say a word, but his steps as he led Naruto back to the examination room were a bit quicker than before, as if he was reluctant to let Naruto get too close. Oh. No sooner did the sound of their footsteps fade within the bathroom than the other stall doors flew open and the three Narutos crouched on top of the toilets jumped out. Their faces screwed up in concentration as they made the seals with their hands, and suddenly they were replaced by Yumino Irika, Mado Gai, and Yuhi Kurenai. The two Fo and the Fo Chunin left the bathroom quickly, moving with purpose. But not before washing their hands, of course. It was fortunate that no one was on hand to wonder what the mistress was doing in the male restroom. Moving quickly across the rooftops of Konoha, the three clones descended on the library. They only had a handful of minutes to get the information Naruto needed and get it back to him. Luckily, each only needed to look up information for 3 or 4 questions, and Naruto had already given some thought on where to find the information. So while the Kurenai clone was opening up a book on ciphers, looking for a match to the one seen on the exam, the Irika clone had a physics book open and was scratching down equations for the kunai problem, and the Gai clone was looking up the names of the founding kage for each village. Working independently, the Kage Bunshin found the answers, or most of the answers, within their allotted time and met up at the entrance to the library. But as they made their way back to the building where the examination was being held, the final obstacle confronted them, one the original Naruto didn't have enough information about to work out ahead of time. Their information was useless if they couldn't get it to Naruto before the test was over. With all the foreign shinobi, the building was heavily guarded, and getting out without speaking to someone was a lot easier than getting back in. The closest they could get without a risky encounter was a rooftop that had a view of the side windows to the examination room. Using a well-polished forehead protector as a mirror, they tried to reflect the midday sun at an angle to catch Naruto's eye. Using a signal code to transmit their information would be time-consuming, but it was better than nothing at all. The only problem was the original Naruto's determination to not get caught cheating. He never looked up enough for the light to catch his eye. Unfortunately, their efforts did not go completely unnoticed. "I can't believe you three," an annoyed-sounding voice spoke up behind them. In spite of themselves, the three clones jumped guiltily and spun around. A Konoha shinobi with a cloth over his head and a needle in the corner of his mouth was glaring at them. "I thought it was a little odd to hear about such young teams in the exam, but I never thought I'd find some of you cheating on your students. The Hokage is going to be very disappointed." The Kurenai clone, realizing the man's assumption, spoke up without thinking. "No, don't," he pleaded, before he realized that he wasn't acting anything at all like his cool and rational sensei. The thought of getting Kurenai-sensei in trouble with the Hokage had evidently short-circuited his common sense. The other shinobi picked up on this as well. "Okay, who the hell are you?" he demanded as needles appeared between his curled fingers. When the clones didn't immediately answer, he whipped his hands up and flung the needles at the imposters. The clones tried to dodge the missiles. Often were coated with drugs or poisons to disable the target, but given how much chakra they had left, the first hit would be fatal. But as they crouched down or threw themselves to the side, the Konoha shinobi did a seal and the seemed to multiply in midair. Each clone was punctured by one or more needles and exploded into a puff of smoke. "Oh." Naruto abruptly stiffened in his seat as his brain was suddenly flooded with information. "That jerk." He cursed to himself. Why did he have to interfere with weight? How do I know what happened to my clones? I wasn't there. His questions cut off as he abruptly realized that he had the information needed for the test now. He went back to the first question and began writing down the equations before he forgot them. There would be plenty of time to think about his clones when he wasn't taking a test. Naruto's pencil moved frantically as he filled in the squares allotted for his answers. As he provided workable solutions to the first 9 questions, the knot in his stomach slowly began to loosen. It was by no means perfect, but at least he'd been able to show his work on all of them a better showing than he'd ever made at the Konoha Ninja Academy. Of course, all his nervous tension quickly returned when Ibiki's voice jarred him out of his reverie, almost making him drop his pencil. "Okay," the scary-looking man barked, "I will now give the 10th problem." Naruto couldn't help but glance at the clock. Indeed, 45 minutes had passed since the beginning of the test. It had only felt like an eternity. This Ibiki guy really should be working at the academy, He was perfect for that place. His musings were cut short as the weird Suna shinobi finally returned from the bathroom, only to get a sarcastic remark from the examiner. Naruto wondered if the guy didn't get enough fiber in his diet. He certainly looked dyspeptic enough as he returned to his seat. I will now explain, the scar-faced man in the black trench coat continued. This is a hopeless rule. First, you are all going to choose if you wish to take this 10th problem or not. Choose? Asked a blonde kunoichi with a Suna hitai worn loosely around her neck like Hinata. Despite her hairstyle, she was the most normal-looking person from Suna that he'd noticed so far. If you choose not to take it, your points will be reduced to 0, Ibiki answered with a faint smile. In other words, you will fail. Your 2 teammates will fail along with you. That statement, of course, sparked off a low rumble of muttered comments and denials from the remaining candidates. Naruto's eyes narrowed. This couldn't be that easy. And here is the other rule, Ibiki continued, ignoring them all as he seemed to savor the moment. If you choose to take it and you get it wrong, you will lose the privilege of taking the Chunin exam forever. Unsurprisingly, Inuzuka Kiba was the first to break the shocked silence. What kind of dumb rule is that? He demanded. There are people here who have taken the Chunin exam in the past. Of course, the boy's indignant fury was not enhanced by the small white dog on his head punctuating his statement with 2 high-pitched barks. Ibiki just laughed at that, a sound that seemed to send chills down Naruto's back to gather in the pit of his stomach. You were unlucky, he said. This year, I am the rule. That is why I give you the option of quitting. Those who are not confident can choose not to take it, and take the exam next year, or the year after that. He chuckled again, and Naruto felt his jaw clench. Let us begin, Ibiki said. Those who will not be taking the 10th question, raise your hands. After we confirm your numbers, we will have you leave. After a long moment, the first hand went up from a seat near Naruto. An older-looking Konoha genin with a goatee and a pinched-looking face stood up. I quit, he said, looking like he was in pain. I won't take it. The man apologized to his teammates as their numbers were called out as well, but the one Naruto could see didn't seem to mind very much. As he turned to watch them file out, he saw Hinata. She seemed to have shrunk down in her seat, and her face had gone very pale. He tried to give her an encouraging smile, but her eyes seemed frantic with worry. That puzzled Naruto as he turned back around. Hinata didn't seem to be that concerned with her rank, so much as becoming stronger so her father would appreciate her, the bastard, so why then it hit him. His dream was to become Hokage, not hers. She was worried about him. Naruto frowned as he pondered this. That first surrender seemed to open the floodgates as others raised their hands. After their numbers were called, each team filed silently out of the room. Some looked relieved, some looked angry, but to Naruto, the worst were the ones who filed out silently, their faces impassive masks. He wondered if those would remain shinobi much longer. He doubted those teams would remain intact for the next Chunin exam. How bad would it be to fail the examination because one of your teammates lost their nerve? Or chose to make the team fail so they didn't personally risk being barred forever from Chunin? Naruto's eyes narrowed as they focused on the chief examiner. He was playing with them, in some sick way. The man had a slight smile at the corner of his mouth. Seeing that, and remembering Hinata's obvious distress made something inside of him snap. In a sick way, it was gratifying to have someone more concerned about his ambitions than their own, but she deserved a lot better than to be tormented for it. He couldn't talk to her, and hand signals were not practical for this, so he'd have to do it indirectly. Naruto vaulted onto his desk, taking care not to step on his test paper. He pointed accusingly at Ibiki and yelled, "This is a load of crap." The examining room went dead silent. Oh. Hinata's hand was twitching, about to be raised, when Naruto-kun's voice rang out. She'd been engaged in a fierce internal debate in the short time since the terms of the 10th question had been explained. She didn't want to see the end of Naruto's ambitions occur in this stuffy classroom. It would crush him if he was forever limited to genin, and she didn't ever want to see such a thing happen. For a moment she wondered if this whole examination had been constructed as a trap to trick Naruto into destroying his dreams. Once, she would never have thought people could be so cruel, but the more time she spent with Naruto, the more she saw how he was treated. There were adults in Konoha who wouldn't hesitate to do something so cruel in an effort to avenge themselves on what they saw as the Kyuubi no Kitsune. She wasn't sure if Naruto saw the trap laid before him or not. Would it be up to her to save him from himself? She darted a quick glance at Shino, but he seemed unperturbed by the situation. Not that he ever really showed any emotion when he was caught off guard. Her hand had been trembling from nervous tension when Naruto's shouted accusation made her go rigid in her seat. Number 23, what is your problem? The examiner asked in a bored tone. Even if they gave you the authority to make such a rule, Naruto growled, do you think another village's Kage will cooperate and not allow their own genin to ever test again? You seem awfully sure of that, Ibiki said. Are you willing to bet your future on that? This is a choice that will impact the rest of your life. Naruto put his fists on his hips and straightened up even more. Hinata's breath caught in her throat. I bet my life every time I go on a mission and I never give up. It's my way of the ninja. And even if they did let you bar me forever, I'll still get stronger and I'll just be the first genin to become Hokage and then I'll fire your ass for making up stupid rules. With that, Hinata relaxed a little, because it was true. Naruto would not let them stop him from realizing his ambitions. She was wrong to have doubted him, even for a second. She was wondering if she should get up on her desk as well, to show her support when the examiner spoke at last. We'll see if your gamble pays off, 23. Now get off that desk before I disqualify you immediately for insubordination. Naruto hopped back into his chair, but Hinata could still faintly feel the waves of killer intent coming from her teammate. For the rest of you, this is your last chance to leave before your fate is sealed, the scar-faced examiner announced in a deep voice that made Hinata's insides twist. She concentrated on the spike of anger that came from her friend. She would see it through with him, or not at all. As teammates, friends, or even the Chunin guarding the door to his office where he led, she would follow watching his back. Ibiki-san waited, looking around the room. But Hinata didn't think anyone else would leave after Naruto's words. And she was right. For the first exam, everyone here passes. Oh. Naruto stared at the examiner, wondering if he'd heard him correctly. Sakura, surprisingly, was the first to ask the question they were all thinking. Wait, what's the meaning of that? We passed already? What about the 10th question? That led to one of the scariest things Naruto had ever seen, even worse than Guy and Lee singing karaoke of I Got You, Babe. At Lee's celebration. Marino Ibiki was laughing. Not a sarcastic chuckle either. A full-blown mouth hanging open, belly laughing. There was no such thing to begin with, he explained with a wide smile that made Naruto want to reach for a kunai, or you can call the choice you made the real 10th question. So what were those previous 9 problems? Suna Kunoichi asked in an annoyed tone. It was all a waste. No, it wasn't, Ibiki disagreed. Those problems accomplished their purpose, testing each individual's information-gathering skills. As Ibiki explained how testing as a group just added to the tension, since people didn't want to let their teams down, it just reinforced Naruto's opinion that the man was a natural sadist, and that his guesses about the test had been correct. At least that was somewhat gratifying. It wasn't until the examiner removed the cloth covering the top of his head that Naruto was distracted from his musings. He had a similar cloth for concealing his bright hair color, but Ibiki's was for a far different purpose. Information can have greater value than life at times, and in missions or on battlefields, he said as everyone stared at the gouges and massive keloid scars that covered the top of his head, leaving no hair at all on the ruined scalp. Information is paid for with the lives of people. If you are detected acquiring information, the enemy can then account for that, making it far less useful. They may even use what you learned to lure your side into a trap, Ibiki continued as he retied the cloth around the top of his head. That can lead to a disaster for your team and your village. So we eliminated those that were not able to gather information without being caught. But then what about that last question? Suna Kunoichi asked, although this time in a much more subdued voice. That question was the main point of this exam, Ibiki answered, spreading his arms dramatically. You were presented with a do-or-die situation, being given the choice to go for the question or not. Look at it this way. You are a Chunin, and your mission is to capture a secret document, but the opposition, their numbers, and their capabilities are unknown. There may be traps set up in advance by the enemy. Now will you accept this mission or not? Just because your life and the lives of your teammates may be in danger, are you able to avoid dangerous missions? The answer is no. Naruto frowned, trying to reconcile this with what Kurenai-sensei had been telling him. She'd been awfully cautious about all the situations teammates seemed to get into, but she hadn't turned down the border patrol mission, had she? And Kurenai-sensei had agreed that Hinata was right to lead them against the kidnappers. Maybe it was less avoiding dangerous missions than it was planning ahead and working to minimize those dangers. There are missions that carry heavy risks, Ibiki continued, but cannot be avoided. This is what we look for in a chunin, or squad leader. Those who cannot bet their lives in a critical situation, those who give up when given the chance because there is a next year, and let their minds be swayed over an uncertain future. They are fools with no determination who have no right to become a chunin. You are here because you gave the right answer for the 10th question, and you can deal with the difficulties you will face. Naruto blinked and swallowed. The first portion of the chunin examination ends now, Ibiki announced. I wish you luck, he concluded in a voice that sounded strangely sincere to Naruto. Of course, this touching scene was utterly disrupted when a dark object exploded through the side windows in a hail of glass that narrowly missed the head examiner. 2 kunai were thrown into the ceiling, supporting the corners of the unfolding bundle of dark cloth. When the cloth finished unfolding behind the figure straightening up from her landing, it announced, Second Examiner, Mitarashi Anko is here in kanji characters 2 feet tall. To say the woman was dressed oddly, even by Konoha shinobi standards, was to make a massive understatement. She wore a skin-tight metal mesh bodysuit that ended well above her knees, along with shin guards over her sandals, a very short miniskirt, and a tan, knee-length trench coat. Everyone, there's no time to be happy, she announced. I am the second examiner, Mitarashi Anko. As if they couldn't read. Let's go to the next exam, she roared, raising her fist into the air. Follow me. The silence as all the genin stared at her was deafening. I don't think they get you, Ibiki said quietly as he stepped out from behind the hanging cloth. She didn't answer, but just frowned at the remaining candidates. Ibiki, she said out of the corner of her mouth, why did you let so many pass? The first exam must have been too soft, she concluded with a glare. It looks like there are a lot of good students this time, Ibiki said diplomatically, and Naruto had the impression that they'd known each other before the exams. Oh well, she said. I'm going to have to make more than half the teams fail in the next exam. I'm getting excited. Naruto swallowed. If anything, she was even weirder than Ibiki. I will explain the details tomorrow, Anko announced. We will go somewhere else, so ask your sensei about the rally point and time. That is all. Dismissed. Oh. Several of the Konoha Jonin sensei were occupying an unused lounge at the Hokage's tower. The space was normally a backup ready room used when a full ANBU muster was called, something that almost never happened. But the seats were comfortable, there was an ashtray for Asuma, and talking amongst themselves gave them something to do while their students were tested. The fact that the Hokage always reserved the room for them, and that it was far away from the examination building, was surely just a coincidence. Despite her intentions, Yuhi Kurenai found herself on edge as she sat there, brooding about how her team would do, especially under a sadistic genius like Marino Ibiki. She'd come to know Ibiki from her debriefing after the disaster that claimed the lives of her sensei and teammates. It was only later that she realized the significance of having a man of his talents in charge, but by that point she could view the circumstances dispassionately enough to understand. When all but one member of a team was wiped out, it was natural that there should be some suspicions. Had she betrayed them? Was she a disguised infiltrator? Had she struck a deal with the attackers to spare her life? Ibiki listened once to her fragmentary, disjointed description of what had happened. He asked her a few questions, and then sent her off to the hospital to have her wounds tended. He'd visited her there several times to check off various details in her story, but his face had not betrayed any signs of disbelief, or any other emotion. It wasn't until over a month later, when she'd had time to think about what had happened and gone looking for him, that she discovered he was the head of the ANBU torture and interrogation unit. The realization that she'd been under suspicion when she returned was daunting, but it didn't stop her from telling him of her own thoughts. He'd stared at her for a long moment after she finished. His eyes flickered toward the seals painted on the walls, and she realized that, with his door closed, his office was one of the few places in Konoha that guaranteed absolute privacy. That's when he agreed with her that the circumstances of the attack did not add up. Too much force had been used to gain too small an objective. There was something else at stake, that much was clear. He'd also cautioned her to keep her head down and her thoughts to herself until such time as she had ironclad proof of her accusations, lest she be made to join her team in the afterlife. Kurenai's stomach was churning as she left that meeting, which Marino Ibiki had logged as the final debriefing from aborted mission #2579B. It was gratifying that he'd taken her seriously. Too many sexist fools would disregard the words of young Kunoichi, regardless of her intelligence. It was a relief that such a professional agreed that something was going on here. She wasn't just suffering from paranoid delusions triggered by her grief. But at the same time, his observations had chilled her. Whoever had set them up had access to resources and information to a degree that was frankly terrifying when she stopped to consider the implications. And this unknown party had demonstrated no compunctions about shedding blood to achieve their goal. Her future survival truly depended on her discretion. She never felt so alone as she walked back to her family's house. Fortunately, they were out of town on a visit to one of her father's suppliers in Wind Country when she'd returned to Konoha. At least she'd been able to spare her mother the worry of her only daughter being in the hospital. But any mistake she made if she tried to pursue an investigation could cost them their lives as well, so she decided to wait until they returned and speak to them both. A week later, a scroll arrived detailing the fire that claimed her parents' lives. At that point, Yuhi Kurenai realized what being all alone really meant. Kurenai shook her head, as if to clear it of unwanted memories, and glanced up at the clock. The test should be over by now. She glanced at the others sitting there. Kakashi was reading one of his little orange books, Guy was doing one-arm push-ups on the floor, and Asuma was smoking and trying to talk Guy into joining him in some elaborate betting pool regarding the exam results. The door to the temporary waiting room opened and everyone looked up. However, instead of Ibiki with the test results, they saw two of the younger special jonin, Gecko Hate and Shirani Ginma. The latter stopped after entering the room and just started laughing for some strange reason. "What's so funny?" Asuma asked in a faintly belligerent tone. Hate just shook his head and elbowed Ginma. "Sorry, but we have to ask. Have any of you left the lounge since the exam started?" All four shook their heads. Hate let out a sigh. "That's what I thought," he said. By this time Ginma had mastered his amusement, and cocked his head, peering at them. It seemed to Kurenai that his attention was focused on her and Guy. "At least the henge were good likenesses," he said after a moment. "Excuse me?" Kurenai asked, narrowing her eyes. Ginma looked over at Hate, who sighed and nodded. "I was assigned to patrol near the examination building this afternoon," Ginma explained. "I caught 3 people on a rooftop trying to signal someone in the examination room. They appeared to be you and Gai-san, along with Yumino Irika, one of the chunin who teach at the academy, but when I confronted them they didn't act quite right." Ginma shook his head at that point. "I hit them with some poison, but they just exploded. I'm pretty sure now that they were shadow clones. I stopped them, but we're still wondering who did it." Kurenai shook her head. She knew of only one clone user that would pick her, Guy, and Irika as models. But what the hell was he thinking? Kakashi looked up from his book. "Since the first exam is over now, did Ibiki-san use the prisoner's dilemma, the impossible task, or something even more devious and twisted on our students?" Hade looked puzzled at the question, but he answered the copy ninja nonetheless. "I believe he went with the second option, with 2 of his confederates seated into the examinees to copy from." At that point, Kakashi's face twisted under his ever-present mask. It wasn't until Kurenai noted the tilt in his visible eye that she realized he was smiling. "You've been had, Ginma-san." "What do you mean?" Kurenai asked sharply. "Do any of you regularly use Kage Bunshin no Jutsu?" Kakashi asked. Everyone shook their heads. Kakashi shrugged. "It's not surprising. It takes a lot of chakra to summon a clone that will disappear the first time it's hit. More than a few will tap my reserves, so it's only useful in certain situations. One of the reasons it's such a chakra drain is because you are molding enough chakra for it to have a physical presence, without a sustaining material to give it mass, like with Mizu Bunshin. Another reason is because the user is creating a faint impression of his consciousness on the Bunshin, allowing it to think somewhat independently." Kurenai remembered working with Shino on the roof repairs, and carrying on a conversation with one of Naruto's clones, thinking it was the original. "Does the degree of independent thought depend on the amount of chakra used to create the clone?" she asked curiously. It was odd, once you got Kakashi talking about the technical details of an advanced, how his goofball persona seemed to just fall away for a time. To a degree, Kakashi agreed with a nod. One side effect of the impression process is this: when a clone is dispelled, the knowledge and memories gained by this secondary consciousness will revert to the original. So what you're saying, Asuma interrupted, crushing out his cigarette, is the user will know everything the clone knows? That's right, Kakashi said. I remember the night we agreed on the team assignments. Iruka said something about Uzumaki Naruto mastering Kage Bunshin no Jutsu? Kurenai frowned. Yes, and those were probably his clones. But from the way you described Ibiki's strategy, one believe you called it the impossible task, and his use of Confederates the students were supposed to cheat to pass? Kakashi shrugged, but Hate nodded slightly. It sounds like Naruto had enough time that night to learn a Jounin-level technique, Kakashi said with an obvious smirk under his mask, but not enough time to read all the fine print. Otherwise his clones wouldn't have been trying so hard to signal him, they could have just dispersed themselves to give him whatever information they had collected. Wait! Genma shouted, the ever-present falling out of the corner of his mouth. That means when you disrupted his clones, you helped them achieve their mission, Kakashi said lightly. I'm sure Kurenai-sama appreciates you helping her Gen, and maybe you should ask her out on a date. Kurenai glared at the infamous copy ninja. Do you really think you have enough traps guarding your literature collection, Kakashi? Kakashi paled for a moment, but then nodded. If I hired my team for a C-rank mission to burn them all, it would be money well spent, she replied. Do you really want to bet all your little orange books against the deviousness of the most notorious prankster to ever graduate from the academy? I must warn you, he's been saving up. He even fooled me once with a... Kakashi visibly swallowed and slowly shook his head. Asuma grunted. You fight dirty, he said approvingly. Kurenai just smiled at him. At this point Genma was banging his head against the wall, while Hate tried to console him. Guy finished his push-ups, but seemed to still have a lot of nervous energy. He jumped to his feet and began lecturing Kakashi about how he should never try to be cool and hip toward Kurenai-san, a sensei who so obviously understood the power of youth, not noticing that Kakashi had his nose again buried in the book cradled protectively in his hands. All the noise was starting to give Kurenai a headache, so she got up and began walking toward the door. As she reached out to open it, it moved aside on its own. Ibiki stood in the doorway, his face impassive but his dark eyes glittering as she stepped back to allow him entrance. Is that Uzumaki brat one of yours? He asked without greeting. Kurenai merely raised an eyebrow. His words betrayed more emotion than he usually allowed to show. Yes. Yes, he is. What of it? That's what I thought, he said as he handed her the test results. Got your fingerprints all over him, so to speak. Got one of the highest scores without being observed cheating at all. My assistants are still trying to figure out how he did it. He had some unwitting assistants, Kurenai replied absently as her eyes flitted down the scoring summary. She smiled slightly. All of her genes had done well, exceptionally well in fact. She looked up at Ibiki, who was visibly glowering. We just figured it out, you can ask Genma. Now what else happened? Ibiki sighed. The last question was a gut check, to see if they could commit in a high-stress situation. I told them that if they chose to answer the last question and failed, they could never take the exam again. Kurenai frowned. That must have gone over well. Well, it did the job. All the wimps were bailing out like rats leaving a sinking ship. When your genin jumps up on his desk and starts shouting at me, Ibiki continued, scowling. He tells me I don't have the authority to declare such a rule, and if I did, he'd be the first genin to become Hokage and then he'd fire me. Fire you? Kurenai asked, going very still. When Asuma nudged her shoulder, she handed him the exam results, still maintaining iron-rigid self-control. Yes, Ibiki confirmed sarcastically. I believe the exact words were I'll fire your ass for making up stupid rules. I see, Kurenai said as she carefully edged toward the doorway. I'll have a word with him immediately regarding his language, she promised as she slipped out into the hallway. If anyone in the room heard the sound of muffled feminine laughter receding down the hallway, they chose not to say anything about it. Oh. To his credit, Naruto actually blushed at more takes that evening when Kurenai questioned him regarding his words toward Marino Ibiki. It was clear he'd been overwrought when he'd confronted the special job in, so she eventually let it pass, Overall, she was in far too good a mood to let anything minor spoil it. All three of her genin had tested out near the top of the group, even when counting only those who had passed. Though she would never say so aloud, Hinata and Shino doing well was only to be expected, but Uzumaki Naruto had never seemed to be much for scholastic excellence, or even subtlety. She hoped that Iruka took the opportunity to rub his colleagues' noses in that fact when the scores were released to the academy. Naruto's use of Kage Bunshin had been inspired, even if it did indicate that he wasn't fully aware of how they worked. Not that she refrained from bringing that up when it was his turn to describe his tactics. The rosy blush that returned to his face more than made up for any embarrassment she'd suffered in the lounge. On the other hand, it was gratifying to note that he'd already mostly figured out that aspect of Kage Bunshin on his own. Moreover, she was cautiously optimistic regarding the confrontation between Naruto and Ibiki. Of course, they had been irked at how publicly Naruto had called his bluff. But at worst, he'd only have to deal with some kidding from the other instructors. Out of anyone in Konoha, she was sure the head of the ANBU torture and interrogation squad could appreciate what had been done to Naruto, and respect the boy for not turning into a murderous beast. Even his comments earlier that day had been laced with grudging respect. Hopefully, when the time came, he would regard defending Naruto from a faceless conspiracy to be in the best interests of Konohagakure. As they finished their meal, Kurenai also couldn't help but notice that Hinata had been even more quiet than usual. The pale-eyed girl described her surreptitious use of the Byakugan in as few words as possible, looking down the whole time. She even looked uncomfortable when Naruto praised her for being extra sneaky. After giving her students directions on how to reach the second examination, using a map of the Konoha training areas, Kurenai suggested that they go home early to pack their equipment and get as much rest as possible. But after she paid the bill, she followed her students out. "Hinata, would you stay a moment?" she asked the Hyuga girl in a voice that was little more than a whisper. The girl nodded. As soon as Naruto and Shino were out of sight, Kurenai spoke again. "Now what's bothering you?" The young kunoichi looked even more uncomfortable, if that was possible. "Ayano, Kurenai-sensei, I am just disappointed in myself," she said quietly. Kurenai refrained from comment as she gestured for Hinata to follow her. After they both sat down on a bench not too far from Morite's entryway, she took a deep breath. Hyuga Hayashi's treatment of his daughter was atrocious, and every time she had to deal with the consequences, it became harder and harder to restrain her anger. "Please explain to me why you are disappointed, Hinata," she asked in as gentle a voice as she could manage. "I have heard nothing tonight that you should not be proud of." "I'm sorry, sensei," Hinata said in a miserable tone. "It was wrong of me to conceal my failures. But I didn't want the others to know." Her voice trailed off. "To know how close I came to making us all fail," she added rapidly, the words practically tripping over each other. Kurenai frowned, trying to make sense of the girl's words. During the 10th question she choked out. "I almost raised my hand. I couldn't bear the thought of Naruto being limited to genin for the rest of his life. I know he isn't stupid, but I thought maybe they'd introduce that rule because he was taking the test this year. So many people are cruel to him I couldn't bear the thought of, but I should have believed in him." Hinata's shoulders hitched as her words became fragmentary. There were few people on the street in the early evening to witness the Hyuga heir having a public breakdown, but nonetheless Kurenai quickly cast a simple to conceal their identities. The last thing she wanted was word of this to reach the girl's father. Then she stiffly leaned over and wrapped her arm around her student's thin shoulders. Hinata went utterly still for a moment, and Kurenai worried that she'd misread the girl's psychological state. She was about to lift her arm when Hinata turned and wrapped her arms around Kurenai with surprising strength. The girl was shaking like a leaf, but Mato Gai's weight training program had very noticeable results. Kurenai swallowed the lump that tried to form in her throat. She'd long ago discarded any plans of settling down and raising a family, but moments like this made her question that decision. For other reasons, Hinata's reaction made her scowl. She wondered how long it had been since anyone had comforted her in such a manner. Since her mother passed away? When Hinata's trembling began to ebb and her breathing returned to normal, Kurenai finally spoke up. "Hinata, I don't see where you did anything wrong. You were concerned for your teammate, and were looking out for his best interests. When it was clear that he correctly assessed the risks and chose to continue, you went along with that. You have nothing to apologize for, either to me or to your teammates." Hinata let go of her sensei in order to look up at her in confusion. Kurenai ignored the odd pang she felt as she let go as well. But I would have made us fail, Hinata protested in a small voice. But you didn't, Kurenai reminded her. Hinata slowly shook her head. Only because Naruto-kun stopped me, she protested. It was foolish of me to think people would go to all this trouble to make Naruto fail, she continued. Kurenai froze in place for a moment as she weighed the risks. It was only an instant, so she was mildly surprised when Hinata looked up at her. Sensei? The genin asked in a worried voice. Hinata, Kurenai said, choosing her words carefully. There is something you should know, but you are under no circumstances to discuss this with anyone besides myself. Do I make myself clear? Hinata nodded, eyes even wider than normal. Kurenai glanced around. No one was nearby, but she quickly performed another that would mask their words from any curious ears. Your suspicions are not completely unfounded, she told her student after a moment. Between Shino, Iruka-sensei, and myself, we have uncovered signs that some people are acting in ways to hurt Naruto and prevent him from being accepted in the village. I don't think they would be able to change the Chunin examination rules to accomplish this, but I am cautious about everything where Naruto is concerned. Hinata's next words caught Kurenai completely off balance. Is my father involved? She asked, tension visible in the trembling of her jaw. I don't know, was all Kurenai could say. She hadn't anticipated Hinata making that connection so fast. The head of the Hyuga clan would have the influence to do some of the things we've uncovered, but that alone is not proof. Hinata's eyes had gone very still, and seemed to bore into Kurenai's as she spoke. He asked me, after we returned from the border, about the fight with the kidnappers, Hinata said. Kurenai's breath seemed to catch in her throat. If he knew that Naruto had drawn on the Kyuubi's chakra, he could use that too. However, Hinata continued, I was unconscious for some of the battle and could not answer his questions. He seemed very disappointed. Now Kurenai finally recognized why Hinata's eyes seemed to have unnerved her for an instant. Her student was angry. Your discretion is highly appreciated, Hinata, she said evenly as she remembered a discussion between her own parents that she'd overheard a year before she graduated from the academy. They'd just returned from the funeral of one of her father's trading partners, one Hiroto Yujuri. He and his daughter Natsuki both died after eating a meal prepared with some wild mushrooms that turned out to have been highly poisonous. It was ruled to be an accident, but Kurenai's parents didn't believe it. The daughter had been 39 at the time, an unusual age for a once attractive girl to remain unwed. It wasn't, however, for a lack of suitors. Her father had rejected the young men of the village who'd asked permission to court his daughter, hoping she would catch the eye of one of the nobility. He was extremely wealthy, but money couldn't buy entry into the nobility of Fire Country, so his only option was through marriage. Unfortunately, his insistence that his daughter could only marry someone of that class had left her alone until her youth had fled. While many who knew the family felt bad about the situation, Natsuki never complained and never spoke about it, but she'd prepared the meal that claimed her and her father's life. Kurenai blinked, as she wondered what had stirred up that memory. As a shinobi of the leaf, Hinata was not quite as constrained as Hiroto Natsuki had been. Perhaps it was the reminder that a meek and soft-spoken exterior could conceal surprising depths. It was a lesson she was sure that Hyuga Hayashi had yet to learn. Oh. Naruto made sure he arrived at Training Area 44 at least an hour before the second exam was scheduled to begin. As it was, Shino was already there, and Hinata arrived at roughly the same time. After all the nervous tension of the first exam, and then unwinding at the celebratory dinner at Moritake's, he'd fallen asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. Now, after sleeping far later than he was used to, he felt ready to take on the world. Which was a good thing, given how some of the other examinees were eyeing him as they arrived at what signs announced was a forbidden area. Shino was quiet as he paced back and forth, facing the fence that marked the boundaries of the training area. Naruto had never seen his friend fidget like that before. He supposed that the seriousness of the situation was finally getting to the normally unflappable Aburame. Serious or not, he doubted Shino would appreciate him commenting on his behavior, so Naruto stood next to Hinata and went through his mental checklist of the equipment he packed. The instructions relayed from Kurenai-sensei said to come prepared as they usually would be for a mission. Given that some of their missions were weeks long, that could mean a lot. Also, when he looked at Sensei's map of the training areas, Area 44, located at the northwest edge of the village and extending well out into Fire Country, was a circle 20 kilometers in diameter. That suggested that the second exam might last far longer than the first. So he, and to a lesser extent Hinata, had packed heavily for this mission. The chakra-enhanced training weights on their wrists and ankles could always be adjusted to make up the extra weight. While doing this slightly changed their balance, they had adjusted by the time they reached the training area. Hinata left the normal bag she carried around Konoha at home, and instead wore a full-sized backpack over her jacket. Naruto's pack was slightly oversized for his height, but was strapped on tightly and didn't interfere with his movements. He'd even tested this by wearing it during a sparring match with Lee the day after he'd purchased it from Tenten's father. The fabric directly over his back concealed a thin layer of metal links between it and the lining. It might not stop a kunai, but it could slow one down. He also wore both kunai holsters and equipment pouches today. Some of the other genin looked at him curiously as they arrived, but others looked thoughtful or worried. He wondered briefly if they thought he had some inside information about the next stage, but it wasn't like they couldn't make the same deductions his team had. He scowled for a moment. He was starting to sound like Shikamaru. Next thing he knew, he'd be lying on his back, staring up at the sky and calling his teammates troublesome. He glanced over at Hinata. Truth be told, if he'd been stuck with Ino, it would have been troublesome. There was no doubt in his mind regarding which kunoichi he'd rather have backing him up. His mind wandered back to his former crush on Sakura, and he was surprised that his lingering anger and disappointment were gone. Perhaps talking with Lee had helped himself as well. "Hey Hinata?" he asked quietly. Hinata jumped a little, but quickly turned toward him. "Do you think we might have forgotten anything?" he asked. Hinata shook her head. "I went over my list 3 times last night before I went to bed. I checked it again this morning." Naruto nodded. "I checked too, but I think I might have forgotten something." Hinata shook her head again. "I don't think you'd." He smiled at her. "When I get excited, I sometimes forget the little things. You're more, what did Kurenai-sensei call it? Detail-oriented?" Hinata blushed and looked down. "I'm sorry," she said. "I just get worried about forgetting something, so I tend to go over things compulsively." Naruto frowned at her. "I think it's a good thing that you do. We'd probably screw up a lot more if you weren't looking out for us." "Shino-kun is very careful with," she objected, her cheeks coloring slightly. "Okay," Naruto capitulated with a grin. "I would probably screw up a lot more if you weren't looking out for me." This time an unmistakable blush spread over her face, giving Naruto an odd sense of satisfaction. He'd been giving this a lot of thought. Kurenai-sensei wouldn't say exactly what was going on with Hinata, but she'd hinted a lot. Remembering how he'd felt when Kurenai complimented him on something, acknowledging that he'd done something praiseworthy, he'd started to understand why Hinata seemed so flustered and embarrassed when he tried to compliment her. The problem was, he could understand why he was so unused to praise. But what reasons could there be for Hyuga Hinata, heir and member of the main family of one of the most prestigious clans in Konoha? That wasn't something he'd figured out yet, and sometimes he wondered if he really wanted to know. But in the meantime, he could build these elaborate traps out of words, maneuvering Hinata-chan into accepting his words at face value. It was odd, of course, how she seemed to want to believe him, but still couldn't, of course. That just added to the challenge, didn't it? And Uzumaki Naruto lived for challenges. "Hinata," he said suddenly, "could you use your eyes to check me out?" His teammate froze, her face turning even redder. "And Naruto?" she choked out after a moment. "I mean, with your Byakugan, you can see inside my backpack and see if I forgot anything," he explained. "I don't want to open it up and dump it out here in front of everyone," he continued. "I don't want anyone to see all the stuff I have packed." "Oh," Hinata said after a moment, as her face began to return to normal. "That makes sense, I suppose?" Her fingers quickly formed the seal for her bloodline ability. "Byakugan," she murmured. A hint of red remained on her cheeks as she circled around Naruto. "I can't see anything you missed," she said quickly, as her attention drifted down to his weapon pouches and kunai holsters for a moment. She quickly spun away and her eyes went back to normal. Oddly, her cheeks were flaming again. "You seem to have plenty of shuriken and kunai," she said quietly, facing away from him. "Though you only packed 1 box of ration bars in your backpack. What if this takes more than a week?" "That's still in there?" Naruto asked in surprise. "I thought I'd decided to throw it away." I figured I can always eat some tree bark if I get hungry and can't find anything else. It would taste better. Maybe that would remind her of how much better her cooking tasted. Hinata stifled a giggle at his comment. Unfortunately, her self-restraint wasn't perfect, as an extremely unladylike snort escaped from her nose. She froze, mortified, as Naruto burst out laughing. He wasn't trying to be cruel, but Uzumaki Naruto couldn't help it. It wasn't unheard of for someone to make an odd noise when muffling laughter, but to hear it come from his refined teammate was just priceless. The horrified look on her face just made it even funnier. It was a few moments before he could even stand up straight again. "Arigato, Hinata-san," he said, bowing deeply before his embarrassed teammate. "Naruto?" she asked, her curiosity seeming to override her embarrassment for the moment. He gave her his widest smile. "Here I am, getting nervous about the exam, and wondering if I forgot something, and then you do something like that to distract me. You rock, Hinata!" Hinata's face paled dramatically, then gradually returned to normal, albeit with a slight pinkish cast to it. Naruto felt inordinately pleased. He'd done something right, even if he wasn't sure what it was. Shino finished his nervous pacing before too many of the other examinees arrived and stood next to them. Given some of the hateful looks they'd been given the previous day, Naruto preferred that they all stand together when around strangers. That wasn't even taking into account what they knew about Sabaka no Gara. Of course, this Mitarashi Anko wasn't exactly increasing his sense of security. He didn't even notice her arriving, which was unnerving enough. Her words didn't help either. "This is where the second exam will take place, the 44th training area, also known as the Forest of Death," she explained in a casual, yet creepy voice. Some of the candidates murmured at that. "You will soon be able to experience why this place is called the Forest of Death," she continued happily. "But before we begin the second exam, I'm going to pass these out to everyone." With that, she pulled a thick stack of official-looking forms out of her trench coat. "These are consent forms. Those taking the exam must sign these." "Why?" several examinees asked. "From here on, people will die," she replied in a casual tone. "Therefore we need people's consent before we continue. Otherwise, I'd be held accountable." She ended with a chuckle, but no one else seemed to find her words funny. "Now, I will begin to explain the second exam," she continued after a moment. "To be brief, this is going to be a survival test." She handed the stack of forms to Hinata, who took one and handed the stack to Naruto, who took a pair for himself and Shino before handing the rest to Shikamaru. "This area," she explained as she unrolled a map she'd pulled out of her trench coat, "is a circular region surrounded by 44 locked gates. In addition to rivers and forests, there is a tower in the middle. It's around 10 kilometers from any entrance to the tower. Inside this area you will have to fend for yourselves as you battle over these scrolls," she explained, pulling 2 sealed scrolls from inside her trench coat as she replaced the map. Naruto wondered briefly if there was a that allowed her to carry so much stuff in it. The light-colored scroll displayed the kanji for heaven, while the darker-colored one displayed the symbol for earth. 28 teams passed the first exam, Anko explained. Half of those teams will get the heaven scroll. The other half will get the earth scroll. Each team gets 1 scroll. "What is needed to pass?" Sasuke asked in a serious tone, making several people look around. "Bring the scrolls of heaven and earth to the tower with your teammates," Anko answered. "In other words, 14 teams, half the people here, will get their scrolls stolen and therefore fail," Sakura said thoughtfully. "It also needs to be done within the time limit," Anko added. "This second exam has a time limit of 120 hours, or exactly 5 days. 5 days? Ino asked, incredulous. "What about food?" Chuji asked, horrified. "Scrounge it up yourself," Anko said in a dismissive tone. "This forest is a treasure box of nature. There should be plenty of food." Naruto had a feeling that Team 10 hadn't taken a look at a map, or realized the implications of the training area size, until now. However, Kabuto added helpfully, there are a lot of man-eating beasts, poison bugs, and poisonous plants. "Oh no!" Shuji murmured as Ino scolded him. "This test seems quite difficult," Lee said with a grin that made his teeth gleam. Niji gave him a dirty look while Tenten sighed. "And we're surrounded by enemies," Sasuke added thoughtfully. "We won't be able to sleep in peace." People will get hurt in the process of fighting over the scrolls, Anko said, and those who cannot deal with the difficulties will be revealed. So can we forfeit if that happens? Shikamaru asked. As a rule, you are not allowed to give up during the exam, Anko announced. You will spend the full 5 days in the forest. Just as I thought, Shikamaru said with noticeable disgust in his voice. How troublesome. While we're on this topic, Anko continued, ignoring the Nara boy, here are the conditions that will fail you. First, if you do not arrive at the tower with 3 teammates and both scrolls, you fail. Second, if your team loses a member, you automatically fail. Finally, you are not allowed to look inside the scrolls until you reach the tower. What happens if we do? Naruto asked curiously. Then you will get a surprise, Anko promised with a nasty smile. If you become a Chunin, you will be handling top secret documents. It's a test of your reliability. That's it for the explanations. We will exchange 3 signed consent forms for 1 scroll over in that hut. Naruto's eyes looked where she was pointing, and saw it was manned by several Chunin proctors, some of which he recognized from the previous day. After you are assigned a gate entrance, Anko continued, everyone will begin at the same time. She sighed gustily. Here's a last piece of advice, don't die. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he clenched his fists. Oh. It took a few minutes for the Chunin proctors to set up a curtain around the hut where the forms were to be turned in. This gave them plenty of time to fill them out, with a little left over for Ino and Sakura to snub each other. Naruto stretched to get some of the tension out of his shoulders, and saw Lee doing some warm-ups. The 2 boys exchanged a nod. While their teams had a 50-50 chance of competing directly against each other, depending on how the scrolls were distributed, they wouldn't forget Gai-sensei's words either. The shinobi of the leaf would stick together if the situation got out of hand and there was a chance of permanent harm. When it was their turn, Team 8 moved silently behind the curtain. When the Chunin held out a heaven scroll, both Hinata and Shino gestured toward Naruto. Naruto shrugged and silently removed his backpack, shoving the scroll all the way to the bottom before closing it and putting it back on. He was touched that his teammates wished to trust him with carrying their team's scroll, and vowed not to let them down. After all of the teams were done, Anko sent each team off with a Chunin to guide them to their assigned gates. It wasn't long until they arrived at Gate 16 and waited for the Chunin guide to allow them inside. After consulting his chronometer, he unlocked the padlock and stepped aside. In a flash, the 3 of them were through the gate, moving into the forest at high speed. The first chakra-assisted leap got them up into the canopy, so they stopped leaving tracks on the ground. Hinata was between the 2 boys, and slightly in front, allowing for the best possible coverage with her all-seeing eyes. Shino signaled danger ahead and to the right, so they smoothly veered to the left. At Hinata's signal, they came to a sudden halt on a thick bough that easily supported their combined weight. No one is in range of my eyes, Hinata whispered. Good, Naruto grunted. Shino, what was that back there? I saw signs of a large colony of Konoha forest leeches, Aburaim answered. I assumed you wanted to avoid them. He paused. I don't sense any of the other teams near us, he reported. Naruto frowned. How? I arrived early and seeded the grass in the meeting area with female Kakai bugs, Shino explained. I believe that 1 or more members of every team have one riding on them now. And as you know, other members of my colonies can smell them from a mile away, Naruto finished, grinning. Shino, you sneaky bastard. He congratulated his teammate. As a reconnaissance team, it would be foolish not to play to our strengths, Shino said as he readjusted his dark glasses. Thanks for watching. I hope you had as much fun as I did putting this epic what if together. Make sure to smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a single twist in the story. Drop your thoughts, theories, or even wild ideas in the comments. I read every single one. And hey, if you're craving more awesome Naruto content, go check out the other videos on the channel. I've got plenty of heat waiting for you. Until next time, stay sharp, stay awesome, and remember, even a shadow clone needs love. Peace out.